Chapter 453. Old Donkey Ma. Mo Chinga couldn't help but smile. She had seen quite a number of late nascent soul cultivators. Among them there were some who were kind and approachable, but she had never seen someone like Old Donkey Ma, who did not care about the demeanor of late nascent soul cultivators and teased his name. She was also stunned. So it's fellow Taoist Ma. Old Donkey Ma turned to Mo Chinga with a smile. Is this little girl the person the Fuxing sword recognized as its master? Mo Chinga stopped smiling and bowed. Greetings, senior. You don't have to be so serious. Old Donkey Ma smiled. I'm really envious of you for being recognized by Senior Fuyaozi. Mo Chinga couldn't help but ask, is Senior Ma also one of Senior Fuyaozi's admirers? Hee, Old Donkey Ma said, how many individual cultivators in Yunzhong don't admire Senior Fuyaozi? Before Senior Fuyaozi passed away, he publicized many of his cultivation experiences to the world. Who doesn't admire such behavior? We individual cultivators in Yunzhong have benefited a lot from Senior Fuyaozi. Mo Chinga remembered Lingyan said there was an individual cultivator among late-stage nascent cultivators. It seemed that person was Senior Ma. She said respectfully, Senior, as an individual cultivator, managed to cultivate to the late stage of nascent soul. You're also a talented person. Far from it, far from it. Old Donkey Ma waved his hand. Not to mention the gap between late-stage nascent soul and deification. Even when Senior Fuyaozi was in the nascent soul realm, he was much more brilliant than me. Old Donkey Ma's expression was very natural. He didn't look proud at all and seemed to be speaking from the bottom of his heart. Mo Chinga now recognized Fuyaozi as her master. She couldn't help but have a good impression of him since he respected her master so much. Oh, I heard that the two of you have reunited after a long time. I guess you have a lot to talk about. This old man is just here to say hello. I won't disturb you anymore. After saying that, he waved his hand and led the donkey away. Mo Chinga and she couldn't help but smile at each other. The donkey that Old Donkey Ma was leading looked no different from an ordinary donkey. However, its hooves were snow white and its eyes were like jade. Clearly, it was an extremely precious spirit beast, just that it looked like a donkey. While looking at the donkey, Mo Chinga said, 8th rank spiritual beasts are really awe-inspiring. It'd be great if Xiaohua and the others could also make a realm breakthrough. She didn't know why, but after all these years, the three of them didn't show any signs of advancing to the 5th rank. According to reason, the spiritual plants in the virtual sky world were always free for them to eat, so their cultivation speed shouldn't be much slower than hers. It seemed she had to ask Feifei next time. She smiled and said, what's the rush? Spirit beasts don't advance as fast as human cultivators. They have a long lifespan. Mo Chinga thought it made sense. In the past few years, because she kept feeding them medicinal pills without stopping, these spiritual beasts advanced very quickly. She almost forgot about this matter. Perhaps the reason why Xiaohua and the others didn't advance was because of spiritual beasts' instincts? By the way, how is Master? Is his injury better? She smiled. Master can be said to have profited from a disaster. The medicinal pills you left not only preserved his cultivation level but also helped him smoothly break through to the late stage. Is that so? Mo Chinga was pleasantly surprised. Master is now a late-stage cultivator? And, if not, how could I advance to the middle stage so smoothly? Advancing to the middle stage of the nascent soul realm in 50 years? This cultivation speed was really amazing. In addition to a large number of medicinal pills, he also had the help of late-stage nascent soul cultivators. If Lord Taoist Jinghe advanced smoothly and Lord Taoist Jinyang had the help of 2 late-stage nascent soul cultivators, his advancement would be much smoother. Mo Chinga was very happy to hear this news. She knew that although her master was arrogant, he was actually quite unlucky on the path of cultivation. Although he was talented and had good comprehension, he never encountered any amazing fated chances. He had to rely on himself to cultivate step by step. After several hundred years of accumulation, he could only reach the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. Now that her master could advance to the late stage, he could finally hold his head high. After being separated for more than 50 years, the two of them felt they had countless things to talk about. Their own experiences, the situation of their old friends, the changes in the celestial pole, the situation in Yunzhong, and how they missed each other. Another half a day passed, but no cultivators came to the island. After the late-stage nascent soul cultivators discussed for a while, Master Taoist Yuanmu said to the two of them, fellow Taoist Qin, little friend Mo, time's up. Shall we open the space now? She looked down at Mo Chinga. Although he had a general understanding of this matter, he didn't know it as well as Mo Chinga. Chinga naturally didn't have any objections. She was already prepared and briefly told Qinshi her plan, so she said, "Senior, please make the decision." Master Taoist Yuanmu nodded, looked up at the cultivators on the island and said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, the agreed time is up. We'll open the Five Saints' secret place now." Hearing this, all the nascent soul cultivators on the island showed excited and solemn expressions. They gathered on this island for the deification fated chances in the mysterious space in the Sea of Returning Ruins. But since there was a fated chance for deification in this space, it must be very difficult to break through. In addition, there were so many nascent soul cultivators on this trip, and they were in a competitive relationship. With treasures in front of them, they also had to be on guard against other people's dirty tricks, so they had to be vigilant. The reason they could get such an opportunity was because of the invitation from the three groups that had holy relics. The other party had holy relics, so even if they had no other choice, how could they possibly share the fated chance with others? Therefore, it would certainly be very difficult for them to get the fated chance. After announcing that the Five Saints' secret place was about to open, Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't immediately call the five juniors to start. Instead, he slowly swept his gaze over the cultivators on the island. Master Taoist Yuanmu's cultivation level was among the best in Yunzhong, and he was also the head Grand Supreme Elder of Juyin sect. Although he usually didn't manage things, he definitely had the dignity he deserved. Now that his gaze swept over them, these nascent soul cultivators who were usually awe-inspiring couldn't help but feel their imposing manner suppressed by him. "Everyone," he said slowly, "the mysterious space in the Sea of Returning Ruins benefits from us, the Five Saints in Yunzhong. Therefore, although we have the key to the space, we don't dare to take the Five Saints' secret place for ourselves. However, everyone must know that we suffered huge losses in obtaining the space key. Our sect's soul-restraining bead and Huayan Temple's inescapable net were passed down through generations of painstaking inheritances. Therefore, before we enter this mysterious space, we'll first set a few rules. What do you think?" None of the cultivators expressed any objections to what he said. The cultivator surnamed Nan from Danxia sect was the first to say with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Yuanmu is willing to share the Five Saints' secret place with us, so we're naturally grateful. Fellow Taoists have contributed more than us, so it's only right that you get more benefits." Upon hearing what he said, Chinga couldn't help but take another look at him. Cultivators had amazing memories. She remembered that this cultivator who looked like a rich man was the one who paid attention to her on One Leaf Island, but she didn't recognize him. What this person said just now was really thought-provoking. His expression was very sincere and what he said was also reasonable. However, get more benefits. No matter how she looked at it, it seemed like there was a hidden meaning behind it. In the face of benefits, there weren't many reasonable cultivators, especially nascent soul cultivators like them. What they were fighting for was the fated chance to advance to the deification realm. How could they be willing to give this to others? If other cultivators heard what he said, they probably couldn't help but have other thoughts in their hearts. She didn't know whether Master Taoist Yuanmu also felt the same. He cast a rather meaningful glance at the cultivator surnamed Nan and said, "Fellow Taoist, Nan is so understanding, this old man is really touched." Under such a gaze, the cultivator surnamed Nan couldn't help but turn his head away. However, he still wore a smile on his face, hiding his embarrassment very well. In terms of strength, this cultivator surnamed Nan was a lot weaker than Master Taoist Yuanmu. Right now, Dawning Danxia sect couldn't fight against Juyin sect at all, so he could only avoid Master Taoist Yuanmu's sharp edge. Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't pester him anymore and continued to say, "Everyone, I've discussed this matter with the late nascent soul fellow Taoists and received their approval. Therefore, this matter is also the intention of all late nascent soul cultivators." Upon hearing what he said, the nascent soul cultivators on the small island all revealed cautious expressions. What all late nascent soul cultivators said was no small matter. The 11 late nascent soul cultivators present were the best cultivators in Yunzhong. Every one of them had astonishing divine abilities and could easily kill early-stage nascent soul cultivators, let alone 11 late nascent soul cultivators working together. It could be said that these 11 late nascent soul cultivators could completely wipe out everyone else. It seemed these so-called rules were already a fact, and the others simply had no room to object. It was just that they didn't know if it would harm their interests. Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't make them wait for too long. He slowly said, Let me first remind everyone that according to the Five Saints' last words, this mysterious space is actually a spatial crack left behind from ancient times. There are many unknown restrictions inside, and entering this space is extremely dangerous. If you encounter anything, you'll have to bear the consequences. As soon as he finished speaking, someone said, "Fellow Taoist Yunmu, how can there be no danger in a land of opportunity? The greater the opportunity, the higher the danger. This is something we all know, so naturally we won't have any complaints." All the nascent soul cultivators nodded. They weren't low-level qi refining and foundation establishment cultivators. As nascent soul cultivators, they naturally understood this principle. Master Taoist Yuanmu continued, "Second, this space is very large. After entering, everyone can split up and search for treasures. If there are any disputes during the treasure search, we won't interfere. However, you must not harm the lives of the 5 young Taoists who have the keys. If anyone violates this taboo, we'll immediately kill them." At this point, Master Taoist Yuanmu's smiling expression was now filled with murderous intent. Without waiting for anyone to say anything, Master Taoist Yuanmu continued, "Third, if everyone finds any treasures at the same time, the 5 of us who have contributed the keys will have the priority to choose." The others were silent for a while after hearing this. The first 2 were just reminders, but this was the only one that involved their immediate interests. In the end, it was progenitor Miao Ying who smiled and said, "Fellow Taoist Yuanmu's request is supported by us and the other nascent soul cultivators. The 5 sacred relics are extremely precious. Since you've contributed them, you naturally have the priority to choose." Hearing progenitor Miao Ying's words, someone quickly echoed, "That's right. We've already benefited from fellow Taoist Yuanmu and the others. We didn't do anything, but we were able to enter the legendary 5 Saints' secret place. What else can we ask for?" Many people nodded, and those who didn't nodded also tacitly agreed. Seeing that no one had any objections, Master Taoist Yuanmu smiled. "Then it's settled. Apart from these 3 points, there's nothing else to explain. Once this mysterious space is opened, there's only exit, not entry. Whether you can get out or not will depend on your own abilities." Chapter 454. "Come here, all of you," Master Taoist Yuanmu said to the 5 core formation cultivators present. Mo Chinga knew they were about to open the space. She glanced at Qin Shi and saw him nod. A red light appeared in his sleeve, so she walked towards Master Taoist Yuanmu. Before this, she had a discussion with Fu Yaozi about what to do if he used his powerful strength to restrain her and threatened her with his life. At that time, Fu Yaozi said casually that it would depend on who was more ruthless, whether he was unwilling to give up the opportunity to open the secret area or she was unwilling to give up her life. Fu Yaozi fought his way up from an individual cultivator to the number 1 cultivator in Yunzhong. Although he had a kind temperament, he was very straightforward. Coincidentally, Mo Chenga was also like that. She didn't like the feeling of being afraid of the slightest thing. Apart from being cautious, she had always been unafraid of taking risks. This was related to her experience of roaming Kunwu with second uncle in the past. As an individual cultivator, how could she possibly be well prepared? Sometimes, whether one could survive or not depended on whether they dared to risk their lives. If there was even the slightest trace of fear, they might die in a dangerous situation. On the other hand, those who dared to risk their lives could instead obtain a slim chance of survival. Now that Qin Shi had arrived, she had a bit more confidence. Qin Shi's 3-young real fire sword was obtained from an ancient secret technique and was extremely powerful. When he killed Mei Feng just now, he already showed his strength. Although this kind of strength could only contend against a late-stage nascent soul cultivator, how could these late-stage nascent soul cultivators be willing to risk their lives to fight a cultivator of the same strength before entering the secret area? If they were injured, others would take advantage of them. Master Taoist Yuanmu glanced at Qin Shi. Sure enough, there was a hint of helplessness in his eyes. He shook his head and said, "When the sacred object recognized its master, the 5 of you should have already received the 5 seniors' secret to opening it. This old man doesn't need to say more. Just get ready." Mo Chinga and the other 4 didn't say anything and each stood in a position. The 5 of them formed a triangle, forming the shape of a 5-pointed star. Once they were in position, Mo Chinga swept her gaze over the other 4 people. Jia Wu still had a smile on his face, seemingly not taking this matter to heart. Ling Yunhe had a solemn expression. Yang Qingji was expressionless. As for Han Shizhi's eyes, they met each other's, revealing coldness. Mo Chinga smiled faintly. Of course, she knew why Han Shizhi looked at her like that. When she had obtained the life-giving sword, Han Shizhi had tried to steal it from her. If Han Shizhi had gotten his hands on the life-giving sword, he would have had 2 saint items. Today, the opening of the 5 saint secret grounds would have nothing to do with her. It was a pity that Han Shirji did not know that the conditions for the revival sword to recognize its owner were so strict. If he had snatched the revival sword, the Five Saints' secret area would not have been opened in the near future. Let's begin. Following Reverend Yuan Mu's order, the five of them took out 5 sacred objects respectively, closed their eyes, and chanted a series of incantations. Whoosh! The 5 sacred treasures issued clear sounds and flew out of the 5 people's hands, floating above their heads. These 5 sacred objects immediately attracted the attention of all the nascent soul cultivators. Apart from the function of opening spatial rifts, these 5 holy objects were the most powerful treasures in the hands of the 5 sages. How could they be underestimated? Other things aside, just the heavenly demon pagoda alone was enough to greatly increase the strength of a demonic cultivator. At this time, the 5 sacred objects each emitted a light with an amazing momentum. Although they were envious, no one dared to have any ideas. After all, compared with the opportunity to reach the divine transformation realm, these magic treasures were not worth mentioning. The 5 sacred objects became brighter and brighter. Finally, with a buzzing sound, a white light rose from each of the 5 sacred objects. When the white light dissipated, 5 smoke-like figures floated in the air. Seeing this scene, everyone sucked in a cold breath, including the 11 late nascent soul stage cultivators. Although these 5 figures were only illusions made of smoke, they were like real people with spiritual energy fluctuations. One was a monk, one was a scholar, and one was a demon. After a little thought, everyone knew that these were the images of the 5 sages. These 5 sages were figures from tens of thousands of years ago. When they left these 5 sacred objects, their cultivation was far from the peak. However, their magical power was much stronger than that of the 11 late nascent soul cultivators present. Many people sighed with emotion. The 5 sages were indeed the 5 sages. In the past hundreds of thousands of years, many powerful late nascent soul cultivators had appeared in Yunzhong, but only the 5 of them were called the 5 sages. This was not a coincidence. When the 5 core formation cultivators finished reciting the incantation, the 5 sages' projections suddenly began to move. Unexpectedly, they too began to form hand seals. Then, the 5 sages' projections suddenly transformed into rays of light, converging into a gigantic ball of light. This bead's power was astonishing. It was actually stronger than the spiritual aura pressure of late-stage nascent soul cultivators. If the 5 of them didn't have the protection of the 5 sacred objects, they probably wouldn't have been able to withstand it. Master. Mo Chinga called out in a low voice upon seeing this. In her sea of knowledge, Fuyazi's voice rang out. Don't worry. The appearance of this bead means that the spatial rift can be opened. Right after Fuyazi finished speaking, the bead suddenly rose and exploded in the air with a loud bang. When the blinding light dissipated, everyone saw that a white teleportation portal had appeared in the sky above the island. Fellow Taoists. Seeing the appearance of the transportation portal, Master Taoist Yuan Mu shouted, "This is the entrance to the 5 sages' secret place. From now on, this entrance will exist for about an hour. After an hour, this entrance will disappear and you won't be able to enter anymore." Hearing this, the island was suddenly in a commotion. Amitabha. Venerable Wuming chanted the name of Buddha, sounding like a great bell. He said with a smile, "Fellow Taoists, don't fight. An hour is enough for us to enter. From now on, the people from the 5 forces represented by the 5 little fellow Taoists will enter first." The early-stage nascent soul cultivators with slightly lower cultivation levels were shaken by Venerable Wuming's chants. They didn't dare to fight and just waited obediently. Then, starting from Juyin sect, the cultivators from Huayan Temple, Yushan Academy and Guifang City entered one by one. After the 4 sects finished, Mo Tiange and Qin Shi entered together. Then, it was the forces represented by the late-stage nascent soul cultivators, followed by the slightly weaker sects like Dansha sect and Wuxing Valley. Finally, it was the early-stage nascent soul cultivators' turn. After an incense stick's worth of time, the island was empty. Everyone entered the transportation portal. At this moment, a flight light flew over from the sky above returning Ruins Sea. After it arrived, it turned out to be an early-stage nascent soul cultivator wearing a blue robe and carrying a sword. This person looked at the empty island, then looked at the teleportation portal in the air. After a moment of hesitation, he stepped in. After entering the transportation portal, Mo Tiange already released the Art of Origin and white silk handkerchief. Qin Shi released the 3 Yang real fire sword, forming a sword formation around the 2 of them in case of any accidents. As a result, they were very safe after entering. There were no restrictions and no demonic beasts. The two of them looked up and sized up the surrounding scenery, but they were greatly shocked. This so-called space crack was actually so big. The place where they entered was at the bottom of a mountain range. The mountain in front of them was several thousand feet high. The middle part was densely forested, and the peak was covered in white snow. It was incomparably magnificent. At the peak of the mountain, among the white snow, there was a palace that was completely white and emitted a faint spiritual light. An immortal palace, a cultivator blurted out, looking at the palace at the top of the mountain in astonishment. An immortal palace naturally wasn't a real immortal's palace, but if this was a space crack torn open in the distant past, it was most likely the palace of a cultivation group with cultivators in the deification realm or above, or even the Mahayana realm. Modern cultivators called such ancient ruins immortal palaces. Only immortal palaces would be full of spiritual light. Upon seeing this immortal palace, almost everyone's eyes shone with greed. Even those late-stage nascent soul cultivators were no exception. If this was really an immortal palace, it was no wonder there was an opportunity to enter the deification realm. It wasn't until now that all the cultivators had no doubt that there was an opportunity to enter the deification realm in this space. Fu Yaozi snorted coldly in her sea of knowledge. It's too early to be happy. Since it's an immortal palace, how could it be so easy to enter? Mo Chenga had already heard about the situation inside this space crack from Fu Yaozi, but she didn't expect it to be so big. This was almost the size of a large cultivation group's main mountain range and contained an entire spirit vein. Master, is there any restriction in this immortal palace? Naturally there are restrictions, Fu Yaozi said. In this immortal palace back then the other 4 people and I put aside our differences and cooperated, but we were only able to enter the periphery. We couldn't enter the real immortal palace's interior. Mo Chenga's heart skipped a beat. She asked, Master, back then the 5 of you were only in the late stage of the nascent soul realm, so why were you able to leave behind the keys? Then after we left, could we also do the same? This time, Fu Yaozi was silent for a long time before he finally said, Back then, the reason we were able to leave behind the keys was because we obtained a set of spatial tearing techniques from the Immortal Palace. This set of techniques was very mysterious, but the spiritual power it required was also very frightening. With our cultivation levels, we were basically unable to use it. Later, we thought of a way to slowly seal the spiritual aura required by this set of spatial tearing techniques into 5 magic weapons. This way, it would be much more convenient for us to come back in the future. As for why we didn't come back, I don't know. Right now, I'm just a wisp of divine sense, so what I know is limited to the time when it was sealed. Then this set of spatial tearing techniques. Fu Yaozi sighed softly and said, In the past, the 5 of us couldn't completely trust each other, so we divided the set of spatial tearing techniques into 5 parts for safety. Of course, I can pass this part to you, but whether the other 4 passed it down or not, I can't do anything about it. Mo Chenga was silent. If that was the case, then this matter couldn't be forced. Once all the nascent soul cultivators had entered, Master Taoist Yuan Mu said, Fellow Taoists, if you want to leave, you can directly leave from here, but after you leave, you can't enter again. Alright, we don't know how many fated chances and dangers there are in this ancient land, so we'll leave it to our own luck. Most of the nascent soul cultivators present had already found allies before they entered this secret place. Now, after a brief discussion, they left in 2s and 3s. The 5 core formation juniors who had sacred objects didn't move, and the others had to listen to the instructions of their elders. Mo Chenga, however, couldn't figure out what these late nascent soul seniors were thinking. Master Taoist Yuan Mu and Yu Shuxing also seemed to think it was a bit difficult. At this moment, they were frowning and secretly transmitting their voices to each other. After a while, Master Taoist Yuan Mu said, Little friend Mo, you said before that you learned the method to obtain the immortal opportunity from Senior Fu Yaozi and used it to negotiate with us. Now, are you going to travel with us? Mo Chenga smiled and shook her head. Senior, you must know that the real immortal opportunity is in that immortal palace, but you don't know how to obtain it, right? Master Taoist Yuan Mu frowned and nodded. Mo Chenga said, That being the case, it's the same if we meet again in the immortal palace. Let me look for some treasures on my own, okay? To be honest, if I travel with Senior and the others, I'm afraid I won't be able to obtain any benefits. She spoke frankly, so Master Taoist Yuan Mu didn't know what to say. If she traveled with them and saw some treasures, she wouldn't be able to share them equally. Therefore, it was normal for her to want to travel alone. And with Xi's strength, he should be able to protect her before they arrived at the immortal palace. He considered it for a moment, then nodded. All right, as little friend Mo said, We'll meet again in the Immortal Palace. After he finished speaking, Master Taoist Yuan Mu waved his hand and led the group of people from Juyin sect away. Following them were the cultivators from Yushan Academy, Huayan Temple, and other cultivation groups. In the blink of an eye, more than half of them left. Progenitor Miao Ying didn't leave. Instead, she greeted the two of them with a smile. Fellow Taoist Qin, Madam Qin, are you really not going to travel with others? Qin, she hesitated for a moment, then cupped his hands apologetically. Fellow Taoist Miao Ying, we haven't seen each other in a long time, so it's inconvenient for us to travel together. Thank you for your warm hospitality. If there's a chance, I'll thank you again. Progenitor Miao Ying smiled and waved her hand. It's just a small matter. Fellow Taoist Qin doesn't need to be so polite. That being the case, let's meet again in the Immortal Palace. She didn't waste any more time and left with the cultivators from Jingshu School. Once everyone left, Qin, she said, a few days ago I passed by you. Not only did this progenitor Miao Ying help me find your whereabouts, but she also gave me some healing spiritual pills. Speaking of which, I owe her a favor. Mo Chenga already heard him briefly mention this matter, so she said, if that's the case, we'll just find an opportunity to return her favor. She then looked at him with concern. Senior Marshal Brother, how's your injury? I still have many healing medicinal pills here. How about we wait for a while before going to the Immortal Palace? Chapter 455. The others were in a hurry to walk ahead of the others so that they could find some treasures. Mo Chenga, on the other hand, wasn't in a hurry. She had long learned about a path from Fu Yao, so there was no need for her to fight with others over it. Besides, Fu Yaozi told her that the real fated chances were in the Immortal Palace. She had the virtual sky world, so other fated chances weren't important. As for the treasures in the Immortal Palace, without her Fuxing sword, she couldn't obtain them at all. Master Taoist Yuan Mu and the others would definitely be waiting for her. Qin, she thought for a moment, then nodded. All right. After years of recuperation and the elixir given to him by progenitor Miao Ying, his injuries were almost healed. However, after the two of them arrived at Immortal Palace, there would be many cultivators in the late nascent soul stage there. At that time, some conflicts would inevitably arise. If he couldn't maintain his best state, it was inevitable that he'd feel a bit powerless. Even though the three young real fire swords' magical power was amazing, he'd only just advanced to the middle stage of the nascent soul stage. The two of them found a secluded place. After confirming there was no one around, Mo Chenga pressed the space between her eyebrows and entered the virtual sky world. The breeze blew gently and the brook gurgled. The virtual sky world was still as serene and tranquil as before. The three spirit beasts were put into the spirit beast bag. Apart from the sound of the wind blowing through the bamboo leaves, there was no other sound. Senior Marshal Brother? Mo Chenga turned to look at Qin Shi. When their eyes met, the two of them involuntarily embraced each other. Ever since they met, they had always been under the watchful eyes of others. They couldn't even be the slightest bit intimate, and they had to constantly be on guard against other people's schemes. Even the joy of reunion had to be suppressed. It wasn't until they entered the virtual sky world that they no longer had to worry about anything else, so they finally dared to release their excitement without any scruples. After a long while, the two of them calmed down and looked at each other with a smile. Only then did they let go of each other and held hands as they returned to the bamboo house. The reunion was naturally exciting, but no matter how happy it was, it had to wait until the matter was over. They didn't have much time. The nascent soul cultivators who entered this space crack would arrive at the Immortal Palace in a few days. They could only be late for a few days at most, and there were still many things to prepare. They couldn't waste any of this time. Senior Brother, this is my newly refined 9 Transformations Yang Restoration Pill. This is the Constitution Enhancing Pill. Hurry up and take it. Now that she knew Qin Shi had lost his Chengkuan bag, which was used to store spiritual panaceas, she didn't delay and took out the healing medicinal pills first. Qin Shi took the 2 bottles, then opened the bottle containing the 9 Revolutions Yang Restoration Pill. He sniffed it lightly, then smiled at her. Your pill concocting skills have improved a lot. Back then you still couldn't concoct this 9 Revolutions Yang Restoration Pill. 9 Revolutions Yang Restoration Pills were healing medicinal pills for nascent soul cultivators. Compared to core formation cultivators, medicinal pills for nascent soul cultivators were more than 10 times more difficult to concoct. Many famous pill concocting masters in the celestial pole didn't dare to rashly concoct them. Those who could concoct original soul-level pills could be called alchemy grandmasters. Mo Chenga stared at him. It's been 50 years, I have to make some progress. Upon seeing her smile, Qin also showed a faint smile. He no longer delayed and took a 9 revolutions yang restoration pill and a constitution-enhancing pill respectively. He then closed his eyes and began to meditate. Seeing that he had already started to heal his injuries, Chenga no longer disturbed him. She used her divine comprehension to communicate with Fu Yaozi. Master? A soft snort came from the Fuxing sword. Disciple acted on his own. Master won't be angry, right? Fu Yaozi was silent for a while before he sighed softly. You didn't do anything wrong. What's there to be angry about? Chenga's heart warmed when she heard this answer. After spending several years with this master whom she met halfway, she respected him very much because Fu Yaozi never treated his disciples as subordinates or servants like the common high-level cultivators in the cultivation world. He would ask Chenga to do something, but he also gave her enough respect and freedom. This kind of feeling was different from second uncles and her other masters. Second uncle was both strict and concerned about her. He didn't spare any details. Lord Daoist Jinghe allowed her to grow freely, but he also sheltered her under his wings. But no matter which one it was, she felt their love for her. Is this your senior martial brother? Fu Yaozi asked. There was a sense of scrutiny in his voice. Yes. Chenga paused for a moment then asked cautiously, Master, what do you want to say? Is he trustworthy? Fu Yaozi said, You even let him know about an existence like the virtual sky world. Chenga was stunned for a moment, then she said with a smile, Master, he's my Dao companion. If even he can't be trusted, who else in this world can be trusted? In the several years they spent together, she never hid her experiences, and Fu Yaozi also knew about Qin Shi's existence. However, she naturally wouldn't talk about the entanglement between the two of them. Fu Yaozi knew her Dao companion was her senior martial brother, and he also knew the master who accepted her as his disciple was this senior martial brother's elder. However, he didn't know the past between the two of them, so it was inevitable for him to make some connections. Seeing that Chenga didn't hesitate at all, Fu Yaozi stopped doubting her and said, All right, since you trust him, I'll also trust him. Even so, Chenga still heard the disapproval in his words, but she didn't explain anything. It was natural that Fu Yaozi didn't trust Qin Shi. Trust had always been the most difficult thing to build in the cultivation world. Besides, she still hadn't formed her nascent soul, but Qin Shi was already in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. If she obtained a fated chance to form her deification in the immortal palace, who could believe that Qin Shi wouldn't take it for himself? She could trust him, but Fu Yaozi, whom she'd never met before, couldn't. But Fu Yaozi paused for a moment then said, Since you chose to trust him, you have to bear the consequences. Master's divine sense won't exist for long. Maybe when you see a fated chance to form your deification, it'll disappear. At that time. Rest assured, Master. Disciple understands, Chenga answered with a smile. Not to mention that she believed him, even if they really obtained a fated chance to form their deification realm, the two of them might be able to share it. Fu Yaozi didn't say much. He chuckled and said faintly, I've lived for more than 1,000 years, and I've seen many brothers falling out with each other and husband and wife becoming enemies. I hope your trust is worth it. Chenga just smiled and didn't answer. 2 days later, Qin Shi opened his eyes. He looked down at his hands, feeling that his whole body was full of spiritual aura, and breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Chenga concocted the 9 transformations yang restoration pill. Otherwise, it would have been very difficult for the hidden injuries on his body to completely heal in these 2 short days. As if sensing his breath, Chenga stepped into the bamboo house from outside. She was pleasantly surprised. Senior martial brother, Qin Shi smiled and said to her, I'm fine now. Chenga was still puzzled when she saw his appearance. Since your injuries have healed, why do you still look like this? His white hair was still there, but his appearance hadn't recovered. Qin Shi said, I've never taken anything like a look-preserving pill. Before I practiced the pure yang technique, my appearance was like this with my cultivation level. Later I practiced the pure yang technique. This technique has the effect of retaining my appearance, so it hasn't changed since. Chenga nodded to show that she understood. At that time he was only about 100 years old, but he was already a core formation cultivator. Normally he should have looked like this. When I was injured in the South Sea, my cultivation level was temporarily damaged. Even my pure yang technique also regressed by a realm, so my appearance changed. My injuries are healed now, but the pure yang technique can only retain my appearance, so. Chenga pondered for a moment, but she soon realized something was wrong. But compared to a nascent soul cultivator, your appearance shouldn't be like this at your age. He was less than 300 years old now. Compared to a nascent soul cultivator's lifespan, which was more than 1,000 years, how young was he? Qinshi's gaze shifted, but in the end he said helplessly, "When I was injured, the power of my nascent soul was sealed. For a period of time, I could only display my core formation cultivation level." What he said shocked Imotenga. Soon after, she glared at him and said angrily, "Senior Martial Brother." His nascent soul was sealed. In other words, he almost fell back to the core formation realm. He actually didn't tell her that he was injured to this extent before. Qinshi smiled bitterly. "Don't be angry. I have the art of 3 primordial cycles. Even if I fell back to the core formation realm, I could cultivate it back very quickly. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to worry. Look, I'm much better now. What does it matter what kind of injuries I suffered before?" But, although she said that, Imotenga knew his foundation must have been injured. His cultivation level was still in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. His strength in fights of magical powers was strong, so it didn't seem to affect him. However, if he wanted to make a realm breakthrough, he would have to spend a lot more time. "I've already thought about this matter," Qinshi said. Advancing to the middle stage of the nascent soul realm this time was a shortcut. Even if this didn't happen, I still had to cultivate in the middle stage for 100 years to stabilize my foundation so that I could advance further in the future. Now, I just need to spend a bit more time so it won't affect me too much. Imotenga was silent for a long time. In the end, she could only sigh helplessly. "You've already thought about it? What can I do? Fine, I'm about to form my nascent soul now. As long as the fated chance is right, I can enter the nascent soul realm. At that time, I can also help you with your matters. It won't be like before when I could only watch helplessly." Qinshi felt warmth in his heart. He held her hand and whispered, "I understand your feelings." Ever since they made up their minds, he never doubted the feelings between them. Just like how he would do his best to do something for her, she would also do the same. He smiled again and said, "If my appearance can't be restored, will you despise me?" Hearing this, Imotenga glared at him. "If you want to stay young, a look-preserving pill is enough. Appearance is just an appearance. What's so important to us immortal cultivators?" Although look-preserving pills were very precious for ordinary cultivators, even aura-refining female cultivators with some background would try their best to buy them, let alone them. In the cultivation world, many powerful nascent soul cultivators never took look-preserving pills because it wasn't worth mentioning to them. Most of the cultivators who valued appearance so much were female cultivators. This was also a small obsession of women. Qinshi smiled but didn't say anything. Sensing a fluctuation from the Fuxing sword, Fu Yaozi was urging them, and Imotenga said, "Senior Martial Brother, if you're ready, let's go out." Qinshi nodded. "We've been idle for 2 days. We can't delay it any longer." Although they didn't care about the fated chances outside the Immortal Palace, being late for too long was always disadvantageous to them. The two of them tidied up briefly then left the virtual sky world. Imotenga looked up at the towering Immortal Palace in the distance and sighed softly. It would be a tough battle to smoothly divide the benefits from so many nascent soul cultivators. Chapter 456. This way. Following Fu Yao's instructions, Imotenga led Qinshi through a forest and circled to the side of the cliff. Below the cliff was a forest of strange stones. The terrain was quite complicated, but it was barren. It didn't look like there were any spiritual treasures growing here. Presumably, no one would choose this path. "This place is treacherous. Be careful and don't act rashly." Fu Yao's voice came from inside the Fuxing sword. Imotenga softly answered and passed the message to Qinshi. Qinshi frowned and quickly released his divine sense. "This place." He hesitated for a moment before continuing, "There's devil aura lurking here. Do we really have to go through this place?" "Let's go." Imotenga answered him with her actions and walked towards the stone forest. There were strange restrictions in this space. If they flew unscrupulously, they might unknowingly be trapped and die without a burial place. Because of that, all nascent soul cultivators who entered this place, regardless of their cultivation level or how many people they traveled with, they all cautiously flew close to the ground. Seeing how certain she was, Qinshi didn't say anything and followed her inside. After carefully observing her surroundings, Imotenga took out the lotus elemental umbrella and opened it. At first glance, the foot of the mountain was quiet and didn't seem to be abnormal. However, the treacherous aura hidden here made her feel uneasy. Fu Yao previously reminded her that this was a shortcut, but there were hidden dangers. She had to put away her curiosity and not touch anything casually. As for the Lotus Elemental Umbrella, it originally had the effect of expelling devil aura. After leaving Shi, Mo Chinga followed Fu Yao's instructions and practiced a cultivation technique that could restrain devil aura. She also refined all her magic weapons so that they had the ability to restrain devil aura. Now, the Lotus Elemental Umbrella had extraordinary power in restraining devil aura. Mo Chinga suddenly realized that whether it was cultivation techniques or magic weapons, she was slowly becoming the nemesis of devil cultivators. From now on, wouldn't she have a huge advantage if she ran into devil cultivators? She then recalled Nie Wushang's previous statement that she didn't want to be her enemy and couldn't help but laugh. If she knew, she would definitely be glad she had foresight, right? What are you laughing at? Qin Shi asked. I think Nie Wushang is very interesting. The Lotus Dragon umbrella floated above the two of them. Its faint fluorescent light shrouded them, isolating them from the strange aura. Qin Shi didn't ask any more questions. He raised his head to look at the Lotus umbrella and said, "It seems you've had a lot of fated chances in the past 50 years. I remember this umbrella didn't have this kind of power back then." Mo Chinga didn't hide anything from him and told him about Fu Yaozi. The two of them chatted as they walked, and they slowly walked through most of the stone forest. All of a sudden, Qin Shi stopped and said, "There's someone ahead." Mo Chinga was dumbfounded. There's actually someone who took this path? There was a cliff on the left and a forest on the right. It was very difficult to find this place. If it were not for Fu Yaozi's reminder, it would have been very difficult for an ordinary person to find this place. Qin Shi said, "There are so many people who entered this cleft space and they're all nascent soul cultivators. It's not strange that someone happened to find this place." Mo Chinga nodded. "Let's continue and ignore them." Yes. Qin Shi had no objections. With Master Taoist Yuanmu's words, presumably, the cultivators who came here wouldn't dare and wouldn't attack them. After a while, Mo Chinga's divine sense also sensed spiritual aura fluctuations from a fight of magical powers. She wrinkled her brows and said, "Could it be that they're fighting over something?" Qin Shi said, "That must be the case. They came here to look for fated chances, and the so-called fated chances also included unique treasures. Presumably, these two groups of cultivators found treasures that could help their cultivation, so they started fighting over them." Even so, Mo Chinga and Qin Shi still moved forward at a moderate pace. They neither sped up nor deliberately avoided the fight. The other side seemed to be a bit afraid of them, so it stopped fighting. "There are a lot of people." Qin Shi frowned slightly. 6 people. But he didn't say anything. The two of them continued flying in the same direction. Before long, the silhouettes of 6 nascent soul cultivators came into view. Among them, 3 were in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, while the other 2 were in the early stage of the nascent soul realm. All of them had just fought a fight of magical powers, so their spiritual breaths were unstable. Some of them were even seriously injured. Not far from them, there was an unremarkable withered vine that emitted a faint spiritual aura. Fellow Taoists. Before Qin Shi and Mo Chinga could speak, one of the 6 people already shouted loudly. Mo Chinga and Qin Shi stopped several dozen feet away from them. Qin Shi said, "Fellow Taoists, what can I do for you?" The nascent soul cultivator who spoke was in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm. He looked to be in his 50s and was dressed like a wealthy man from the secular world. Only the feather fan in his hand shone brightly, adding a hint of immortality to his appearance. He smiled and cupped his hands. "I'm Nanguatian from Danxia sect. You must be fellow Taoist Qin and little fellow Taoist Mo, the ones with the Fuxing sword, right?" Qin Shi's expression was indifferent. He nodded and returned the greeting. "Yes." The two of them had long been recognized by everyone, so Nanguatian only asked casually. He then chuckled and said, "This space is so big, but we were unexpectedly able to meet 2 fellow Taoists. It must be fate. May I know where fellow Taoists are going? Would you like to come with us?" Mo Chinga frowned inwardly. These 6 people were obviously enemies. There were still spiritual aura fluctuations in the air, but Nanguatian was now inviting them to come with him. Before she and Qin Shi could answer, the other nascent soul cultivator snorted coldly and said, "Fellow Taoist Nan, what do you mean? The outcome of our battle hasn't been decided yet you're already so impatient to rope in fellow Taoists Qin and Mo?" Nanguatian's expression didn't change at all when he heard this sarcastic remark. He still wore a smile on his face and said, "Hee, there's no difference whether I ask you now or later. Why are you so impatient, fellow Taoist Qi?" Everyone could hear the sarcasm in Nanguatian's words. The stern-faced cultivator confronting Nangwatian looked angry. Just as he was about to speak, Qinshi said, "Fellow Taoists, my wife and I were just passing by, so we won't stay any longer. Farewell." Once he finished speaking, he indifferently swept his gaze over the withered vine behind the 6 people. He cast a glance at Mo Chenga before the 2 of them flew away without stopping. "Fellow Daoist Qin." Nangwatian called out from behind them. When he didn't get a response, he heaved a sigh of relief. He shifted his gaze to the withered vine, and his eyes immediately lit up. His smiling face was now filled with a murderous aura. After flying for a while, the 2 of them slowed down and walked in silence for a while. Qinshi said, "Looks like a lot of people will die." Mo Chenga frowned and sighed. Yes. That withered vine looked unremarkable, but it contained a faint and pure wood spirit spiritual aura. If she wasn't mistaken, this withered vine was at least 10,000 years old. This was the time when wood spirit spiritual aura was at its fullest and was about to wither. The wood spirit spiritual aura inside could be absorbed for one's own use or made into a magic weapon. It was no wonder that several nascent soul cultivators from both sides were willing to risk their lives to fight over such a treasure. After entering the nascent soul realm, one's cultivation speed would be extremely slow. Only a spiritual treasure like this would have a significant effect. If it was made into a magic weapon, it would be an astonishing spiritual treasure. The foot of the mountain was only an ordinary place in this spatial crack, but it unexpectedly had such a spiritual treasure. It could be imagined how many treasures there were in this place. However, the appearance of a spiritual treasure was a fated chance, but it was also a calamity. Most of the nascent soul cultivators in Yunzhong had entered this space, but it was unknown how many of them could come out alive. The 2 of them just sighed and didn't think too much about it. They continued to walk their own paths. This was the rule of the cultivation world, the survival of the fittest. If one wanted to become a great cultivator above others and find the path to immortality, they had to survive in this kind of cruel competition. It was the same for them as well. "Be careful here." Fu Yaozi's voice came from the Fuxing sword on her back. Mo Chenga vigilantly released the art of divine origin. As soon as Qinshi saw her movements, he immediately took out the 3 Yang real fire sword. The 3 Yang real fire swords light flashed, and a powerful momentum enveloped them. The lotus umbrella floating above them instantly shone with a dazzling light. "There's devil aura." Mo Chenga turned her palm and opened the heaven and earth fan. Under Fu Yaozi's guidance, the lotus umbrella had been modified, so it was very sensitive to devil aura. The slightest bit of devil aura would alarm it. "Don't move." Fu Yaozi immediately reminded them, "The devil aura here is very strange. The more powerful the spiritual aura you release, the more powerful its backlash will be." Mo Chenga was stunned and told Qinshi what he said. Qinshi frowned. "What should we do? If that was the case, wouldn't they have spells but couldn't use them?" Fu Yaozi said, "Use the devil-subduing art I taught you and use your breath-concealing technique." Mo Chenga hesitated for a moment then asked, "Master, then my senior martial brother?" Fu Yaozi said faintly, "Since you trust him, teach him." "Thank you, Master." Mo Chenga was delighted. The devil-subduing art was an ancient technique. Its content was quite simple. With Qinshi's current cultivation level and Mo Chenga's explanation, it didn't take him long to master the technique. The 2 of them put away their magic weapons according to Fu Yaozi's instructions and used the devil-subduing art together with the breath-concealing technique. Sure enough, the devil aura that rose sharply just now dissipated a lot. Mo Chenga couldn't help but laugh at herself. Just now she really thought she was smart. As soon as Fu Yaozi reminded her, she immediately used the art of origin to cause spiritual aura fluctuations. Then Qinshi released the 3 Yang real fire sword, which caused the devil aura to rise sharply. The further they went, the more devil aura drifted around. It wasn't strong, but it surrounded the 2 of them tightly. The more Mo Chenga walked, the more strange she felt. "This devil aura? What's wrong?" Qinshi asked casually while looking around. Mo Chenga frowned and thought for a long time before she finally said, "Don't you think this devil aura is very familiar?" "Familiar?" Qinshi sensed it for a while and said in shock, "Primordial devil aura." "Yes." Although this devil aura was faint, its aura was exactly the same as primordial devil aura. "You also know about primordial devil aura?" Fu Yaozi's surprised voice came from the Fuxing sword. Mo Chenga said, "Master, do you remember I once met a martial cultivator who eventually turned into a devil cultivator? The devil aura she swallowed was primordial devil aura." "I see. Master, so the strange aura you mentioned is primordial devil aura? What's going on? Fu Yaozi was silent for a while, then said, since you know about primordial devil aura, there's no harm in telling you in detail. Yes, this so-called primordial devil aura is the strangest thing in this spatial crack. Chapter 457. Back then, I was still a mid-stage nascent soul cultivator with an undeserved reputation in Cloud Zhong. At that time, there was a legend in the returning ruined sea that an immortal mountain would appear every 100 years. Those who were fated to see it would be able to step onto the path of immortality. All of my abilities come from the ancient ruins, so I am quite knowledgeable about such legends. Fu Yaozi said slowly, legends that have been passed down for a long time will usually change in the process of being passed down, but most of them aren't groundless. Thus, I went to the legendary place in the returning ruined sea to search for traces of this legend. Master, you're talking about this spatial rift? That's right. Fu Yaozi said, I searched for several years in the returning ruined sea and finally found some clues. Coincidentally, I found the legendary immortal mountain in the sea. The cultivation world of 100,000 years ago was no different from today. Since an immortal opportunity had appeared, cultivators naturally scrambled for it. In fact, the so-called immortal mountain was just a mirage. The real immortal opportunity wasn't at the immortal mountain. Fu Yaozi understood this point, which was why he was able to find this spatial crack. The clues that Fu Yaozi had left behind had led the other four to this place as well. They were the other four cultivators who were later called the 5 sages in Cloud Zhong. These 5 cultivators, 2 Taoists, 1 Buddhist, 1 Confucian and 1 fiend, belonged to different forces, but they were all outstanding cultivators of the current era. After entering the spatial rift, they were first on guard against each other, then went their own ways. Finally, they realized that the space here was far beyond their abilities, so they had to work together to explore. Their experience in this space could be said to be a narrow escape. Fortunately, they were all extremely intelligent people. After letting go of their past hatred, they obtained amazing opportunities and shared the space-tearing technique. When they came out of the spatial rift because they didn't trust each other, they destroyed the passage and split the space-tearing technique into 5. Then each of them cultivated amazing abilities and became the top cultivators in Cloud Zhong. They were called the 5 sages. It could be said that without this space, without the opportunities here, there wouldn't be the 5 sages in Cloud Zhong. The 5 of us are all intelligent people who cultivated to this realm, but after entering this space, we were hindered everywhere and had no choice but to work together. The biggest reason is the primordial devil chi. Upon hearing up to this point, Mo Chenga asked, Master, although the primordial devil aura I've seen before is powerful, it's never reached this level. What's the mystery behind the primordial devil aura in this space? Fu Yaozi chuckled lightly and said, Master is unable to answer this question of yours. Because of the limitations of our cultivations, we were merely able to obtain a fortuitous encounter from it all those years ago, and we were unable to fully explore its profundities. Then how did you encounter the primordial devil chi back then? Fu Yaozi was silent for a long time before replying, there is an underground palace beneath this immortal palace. Underground palace? That's right. Fu Yaozi said, this prime devil chi came from a stone tablet in the underground palace. Stone tablet. Mo Chenga's expression changed. What's wrong? She turned to look at her. Mo Chenga gave him a meaningful glance, then continued to communicate with Fu Yaozi with her divine comprehension. Master, in this underground palace, is there one of the 5 spirits enshrined? Fu Yaozi paused for a moment and was a little surprised. That's right, how did you know? Another 5 spirits sacrificial temple. Mo Chenga couldn't help but recall her own speculation. When she was in the foundation building realm, she met Ren Yufeng, a disciple of Zhengfa sect, in the northernmost glaciers. Because of that, Ren Yufeng walked on the devil path. After coming to Yunzhong, Fei Fei said that there was one in the Carefree Valley. Then he found out that the Starfall City Lord, Mei Feng, who lived near the Carefree Valley, practiced the primordial demon great technique. Now, Prime Devil Chi had been discovered in the returning Ruined Sea spatial rift, and Fu Yaozi had confirmed that there was also a 5-soul sacrificial temple in the returning Ruined Sea, with a stone tablet that emanated Prime Devil Chi. She had once made a deduction about this matter. A sacrificial temple that enshrined one of the 5 spirits and a strange stone tablet could be used to comprehend the Prime Devil Grand technique. This matter was related to 3 people, Ren Yufeng, Master Song Feng and City Lord Mei. The reason Ren Yufeng couldn't cultivate the real primordial devil art was probably because his cultivation level was too low and his comprehension wasn't good. There was no doubt that Master Song Feng and City Lord Mei had cultivated the prime devil great technique. And now, Fu Yaozi had said that there was another one in this spatial rift. In that case there were 4 of them. The 5 spiritual beings were the Azure Dragon, White Tiger, Vermilion Bird, Black Tortoise, and Qilin. In that case, the so-called Divine Dragon Sacrificial Temple was actually the Azure Dragon Sacrificial Temple. Just what kind of mysteries did this 5 spirits sacrificial temple left behind by the primordial era contain? Master, which of the 5 spirits is this shrine dedicated to? It's a vermilion bird. Fu Yaozi was puzzled. Have you seen it before? Mo Chenga took a deep breath and said, yes. When Disciple was in the foundation building realm, I saw a similar sacrificial temple in the northernmost glacier in the celestial pole. The Azure Dragon was worshipped there. She had told Fu Yaozi about her experiences a long time ago, but the details were not too detailed. Now that she said it, Fu Yaozi understood. I see. Looks like this isn't normal. After a while, when she didn't hear Fu Yaozi speak again, she couldn't help but ask, Master? You haven't explained it clearly. What's going on with the primordial devil chi in this space? Also, what about that stone tablet from back then? Did you guys? Back then, Devil Venerable Tianho wanted to take that stone tablet away, but we didn't let him, Fu Yaozi said lightly. Oh, Mo Tiange said, indicating that she understood. Under those circumstances, although they teamed up, they were afraid of each other. The primordial devil chi was so powerful that the other 4 definitely wouldn't let Devil Venerable Tianho take the stone tablet away and let him practice the primordial devil art. In that case, didn't that mean the stone tablet was still in the sacrificial temple? We've roughly studied the contents of the stone tablet. This kind of aura is called primordial devil chi, which we learned about from the stone tablet. Fu Yaozi changed the topic. Don't you think it's strange? This mountain was obviously built in an immortal palace, so why is there a sacrificial temple in the underground palace? Since this sacrificial temple is dedicated to one of the 5 spirits, why is there a stone tablet emitting devil aura? Disciple also doesn't understand. Fu Yaozi didn't expect her to answer. He said, Master has a premonition that if we can unravel this riddle, we'll know the secret of the distant past era's cultivation world. Mo Chenga knew this master was passionate about exploring the true meaning of the path of immortals, but she thought the possibility was too small. General Yun already knew about Fu Yaozi's deification and sainthood. Since his real body had already become a deification cultivator, why didn't he come back here to continue exploring? Either it was unnecessary or he couldn't do it. If a deification cultivator thought it was unnecessary or couldn't do it, what could she do? Alright, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's talk about the primordial devil chi. This space is full of spiritual aura, so it should have been an excellent spirit vein. I don't know why, but the primordial devil chi in the underground palace leaked out. This primordial devil chi is very strange. The stronger the spiritual aura, the stronger it is. Therefore, if you find primordial devil chi in the surroundings, you mustn't use powerful magic weapons. Otherwise you'll suffer a backlash. I understand, Master. Mo Chenga temporarily stopped talking with Fu Yaozi. She told Qin Shi the news she just heard. Qin Shi was silent for a long time. Mo Chenga saw that he was deep in thought, so she asked, What's wrong? Did you think of something? Qin Shi was meticulous, so maybe he could think of something she didn't. Qin Shi said, I haven't seen the others with my own eyes, but I've seen the dragon bones you got from the northernmost area. Yes, is there a problem? It'd be strange if there's no problem, Qin Shi said. The dragon bones' momentum was strong and holy, so they shouldn't be fake. In other words, that sacrificial temple worshipped the real 5 spirits. That being the case, why was there a stone tablet emitting devil aura? This was also something Mo Chenga couldn't understand, so she didn't answer. She just stared at Qin Shi, waiting for him to continue. I can only think of one possibility. Qin Shi paused for a moment, then said slowly, suppression. Mo Chenga was stunned, but she suddenly understood. I see. Using the power of the 5 spirits to suppress the primordial devil chi. Qin Shi looked at her and said with a smile, This is only a possibility, not necessarily the truth. Moreover, there's something that doesn't make sense. Several people have obtained this stone tablet. Although they comprehended the devil art from it, it didn't have much power. That being the case, why did they suppress it instead of destroying it? Mo Chenga thought for a moment, then said, This can't be explained. The primordial devil aura in this space was able to give the 5 sages such a headache back then, so it's obviously very powerful. Therefore, the primordial devil aura on this stone tablet should have been very powerful, while the stone tablets obtained by other people, for some reason or because of the passage of time, lost their former might. She thought for a moment, then nodded. What you said isn't impossible. However, this sacrificial temple is a relic from the distant past era, and it's not even recorded in ancient books. What's going on is only our guess. And Chinga temporarily gave up on exploring. She thought for a moment, then said, but we still have to go down to this underground palace. If we have a chance, we'll take that stone tablet with us. By the way, you got Mei Feng's Chenkuan back. Is there a similar stone tablet inside? Upon hearing that, she took out Mei Feng's Chenkuan bag from his robe and searched inside. Sure enough, he found a heavy stone tablet. Chenga looked at it. It was similar to the one Ren Yufeng got, but the thing engraved on it was different. It wasn't an azure dragon but a black tortoise. Sure enough, it's the black tortoise sacrificial temple. After finding this stone tablet, part of her guess was confirmed. The 5 spirits sacrificial temple, the stone tablet, and the primordial devil art were indeed related. She threw the stone tablet back and said, we'll study it when we have time. After thinking for a moment, she was still worried, so she warned him again, when I touched the stone tablet that day, I almost lost my mind. You have to be careful. She smiled and said, rest assured. The reason your mind was so easily taken away that day was probably because your cultivation level wasn't high enough. Didn't you give that stone tablet to Master? Nothing happened to Master, which means I'll also be fine. She was only in the foundation building realm that day, so her mental state and divine sense couldn't be compared to that of a nascent soul cultivator. Chapter 458. Chenga wiped her sweat as she walked past the foot of the mountain covered in primordial devil aura. If it wasn't for Fu Yaozi's reminder, the two of them would have to spend a lot of effort to get out. After cultivating to this stage, a cultivator's vigilance had already been deeply engraved in their bones. As soon as there was an abnormality, they would immediately take action. In this place, this instinctive reaction just happened to cause serious consequences. This primordial devil qi is weaker than before. Fu Yaozi's voice came from the Fuxing sword. He looked pensive. Could it be that the demonic energy will slowly dissipate with time? Chenga didn't know what the situation was like 100,000 years ago, so she didn't answer. After crossing the rocks at the bottom of the cliff, they saw a narrow canyon in front of them. This canyon was extremely deep and narrow, as if it was a crack left behind by a giant sword. Looking from this side, the canyon was pitch black, and the scenery couldn't be seen clearly. It was difficult to use one's divine sense to probe inside. Both Chenga and she felt strange, so when they walked closer to take a look, they discovered that not even a blade of grass grew in the ravine. There was an underground fire burning, scorching the rocks in the ravine black. This is extreme young real fire. She suddenly sucked in a deep breath as he looked at the situation in front of him. What? Chenga was confused. She wrinkled his brows and said, the so-called 3 great real fires of outer fire are extreme young real fire, earthly pole real fire, and samadhi real fire. Extreme young real fire is the highest grade of earthly pole real fire. He looked at Chenga with a solemn expression. As far as I know, only one wisp of earthly fire in Danding School's Mount Tianhua has reached this quality. This kind of extremely pure earth pole true fire is even more incisive than the nascent fire of a nascent soul cultivator. Is that so? If that was the case, wouldn't going through this valley be equivalent to roasting himself in the nascent fire of a nascent soul cultivator? Chenga admitted that she didn't have that kind of ability. Master? Her divine will asked Fu Yaozi. Must we pass through here? Can we find another way? Fu Yaozi said, haven't you noticed that the primal devil qi is even denser above this canyon? Chenga raised her head, but all she could see was darkness above her head. This canyon was filled with extreme yang true fire, so everything was black. Her divine sense was somewhat lacking, so she overlooked it just now. Then how do we get there? This canyon is so long that I'm afraid my protective magic treasure won't be able to hold on. Whether or not I can endure it, won't we know once we try? Fu Yaozi casually said. Master. Ha. Fu Yaozi laughed and said, do you think that I would still ask you to go if I knew it was impossible? Don't worry. After saying this he said no more. Feeling helpless, Chenga said to Qin Shi, do you have any protective techniques? After a moment of hesitation, Qin released the body-protecting sword formation. He then fumbled in his Qingquan bag, took out 2 glittering talismans and handed one to her. I obtained this talisman when I explored Demonic Mountain years ago. Its nature is water, so it happens to restrain the real fire inside. You can give it a try. Emo Chinga held the talisman in her hand. She sensed the surging spiritual aura bound inside the talisman, so she knew this talisman was very rare. Perhaps even top-grade magic weapons wouldn't be enough to exchange for it, so she asked, "Isn't it a pity to use it like this?" Qin only said, "What's a pity? No matter how valuable something is, it's still used to save our lives." He then slapped the talisman, and a spiritual light emitted from his body, forming a thin, misty barrier. "This brat actually has such a good thing." Fu Yaozi's voice came from the Fuxing sword. Emo Chinga imitated him and also slapped the talisman on her body. She asked casually, "What? Master, do you recognize it?" Fu Yaozi was silent for a while before he said, "If I'm not mistaken, this talisman is an ancient item. It seems this senior martial brother of yours also obtained a lot of fated chances. Otherwise, how could he be willing to use this kind of talisman so easily? If he used it in a fight of magical powers between cultivators of the same realm, he would have the upper hand." Demonic Mountain was an ancient relic. Qin went there twice and returned unscathed each time, so it wasn't strange for him to obtain such a treasure from it. Emo Chinga just smiled. She put away the Lotus Dragon umbrella, released the Art of Chaotic Origin and the white silk handkerchief, then stepped into the canyon with Qin. With a bang, the protective aura barrier collided with the supreme yang real fire in the canyon, producing a slight sound. The aura barrier shook a bit, but it was still stable. A light mist rose from it, enveloped the supreme yang real fire, and then extinguished it. Water and fire restrained each other. This talisman was indeed extraordinary. Even the purest earthly real fire couldn't resist it. "Let's go," Qin said. He waved his arm and the sword turned invisible, circling around the two of them. The two of them turned into a flight light and flew into the depths of the canyon. "Oh, how could this be?" Emo Chinga was surprised after they flew for a while. The white silk handkerchief was given to her by a deification cultivator. The stronger she was, the stronger her defense would be. With her current cultivation level in the core formation realm, it was strange that she wasn't damaged in the slightest when facing the supreme yang real fire of the nascent fire level. She thought for a moment and asked, "Master, is that you?" Fu Yaozi's snort came from the Fuxing sword. "If I wasn't sure, why would I let you take this path?" Emo Chinga smiled embarrassedly and asked, "Master, what did you do?" Fu Yaozi answered, "The things I asked you to buy before are naturally useful. However, it's also because the talisman your senior martial brother gave you is extraordinary. Otherwise, you'd have to spend a lot of effort to pass through this canyon." Emo Chinga pondered for a moment and understood. Previously, she bought a lot of materials according to Fu Yaozi's requirements, either to refine magic weapons or to make objects. The white silk handkerchief was refined with a kind of spiritual water, so it was for this trial. The two of them flew quickly. In just a moment they reached the bottom of the canyon. When they looked up at the sky, they could only see a gray-white line. Their surroundings were dark, and only the red light of the earthly real fire could be seen. Pop. Emo Chinga looked down and saw that the mist barrier around her body was shaking. It seemed like it couldn't hold on much longer. Qin frowned and put his hand on her waist. Their mist barrier merged into one, and his spiritual aura was transmitted to her steadily. "Hold on a little longer." Emo Chinga was very calm. She pointed with her spiritual aura, and the white silk handkerchief turned into mist, firmly protecting the two of them. Outside the white silk handkerchief, Qin's 3 yang real fire sword formation blocked the supreme yang real fire outside. As time passed, the mist barrier around them gradually became unstable. When the mist and the real fire came into contact, a pop sound was heard. At first it was only occasional, but gradually, it became more and more frequent. Qin looked ahead and waved his sleeve. The sword formation around him suddenly emitted a fierce sword aura and slashed at the supreme yang real fire around them. Pop. Pooh. The sound continued, and the true fire that came into contact with his sword chi was suppressed. Emo Chinga raised her hand. Many immortal flowers and spiritual plants flew out of the heaven and earth fan. The moment they touched the white silk handkerchief, they turned into spiritual aura and attached to it. The mist transformed from the white silk handkerchief shone with a white light, and it suddenly became a lot more solid. The two of them used their own methods while flying forward quickly. Haven't they arrived yet? Master Taoist Yuanmu asked the person next to him with a calm expression. The one who answered was Ling Xiu. There's no movement. In fact, with Master Taoist Yuanmu's divine sense, he already knew the answer. He only asked this to express his displeasure. Master Taoist Yuanmu didn't say anything. He raised his head and looked at the immortal palace close at hand, remaining silent. Ling Yunhe hesitated for a moment, then took a step forward. Martial Uncle Yuanmu, that fellow Taoist Mo has Senior Fu Yaozi's divine sense protecting her. Can we really hide this from them? Master Taoist Yuanmu's gaze was always on the immortal palace. The towering immortal palace was made of many huge jades. It had eaves and chiseled axes and knives, giving it a magnificent momentum. These jades exuded traces of pure spiritual aura. They were actually high-grade spirit stones that rarely appeared in the outside world. Moreover, they were snow-white in color. They were actually the rarely seen ice attribute. So what if it's Fu Yaozi's divine sense? Yuan Muzhen said slowly, this is an immortal's chance patriarch, Saint Gui Zhen, specially left for our sect. Back then they acted separately, so presumably Fu Yaozi also didn't know about it. But Ling Yunhe still said, disciple thinks that since Senior Fu Yaozi is known as the #1 person in Yunzhong, he must have something unique, Yunhe. Master Taoist Yuanmu glanced at him and said, your cautiousness is your strength, but being too cautious will become a weakness. No matter how powerful Fu Yaozi is, this isn't his real body. In the past 100,000 years, is there really no one who can be compared to Fu Yaozi? I don't think so, they just don't have the chance to compete with him. Besides, Master Taoist Yuanmu smiled, showing a smug expression as he looked at the towering immortal palace. When we set foot on the immortal path, we have to constantly take risks. Only those who are brave can walk to the end. The immortal's chance patriarch left behind is definitely worth this kind of risk. Ling Yunhe was speechless. Yunhe, don't think too much about it. Ling Xiu looked at his juniors with an indifferent expression. Your senior uncle Yuanmu has already made all the necessary preparations. Even if all of us die here, Juyin sect will not fall. The high-level cultivators we've left behind in the sect are enough for Juyin sect to have a foothold in Yunzhong. Besides, there are also the treasures of heaven and earth brought back by those senior uncles. If we succeed, Juyin sect will not only be the #1 sect in Yunzhong, but also the #1 sect in the world. Ling Yunhe moved the corner of his mouth and finally said, yes, this disciple understands. Reverend Yuanmu raised his head and looked at the sky again. It's been 3 days and they still haven't arrived. Looks like they've gone to fight over those spiritual treasures. This is a good thing. A cultivator next to Taoist Master Yuanmu said. He was tall, white-haired, and wore a black iron mask on his face. He was also at the late nascent soul stage, but he had been standing silently in the queue. At this moment he spoke in a low voice. This means that they still value the treasures of heaven and earth outside the immortal palace, but they don't know what kind of immortal fate is inside the immortal palace. Reverend Yuanmu smiled and nodded. Senior Brother Iron Mask is right. The later they come, the more ignorant they are. Alright, let's take advantage of this time to make some preparations. Even if we don't succeed, we absolutely can't let others go out. When he said the last sentence, his smile disappeared, and his gaze revealed a heavy killing intent. Chapter 459. Mo Chinga suddenly looked up at the foot of the mountain. What's wrong? Qingxi asked. Look. She pointed at the entrance of the space crack. Did someone go out? Qingxi concentrated. They were a bit far away, so his divine sense couldn't detect that direction. However, with his eyes, he seemed to see flashes of light at the entrance from time to time. Except for the half an hour when it was open, no one came in or out of the entrance. It seemed that someone had left. Indeed, it's only been 3 days. Mo Chinga frowned and said slowly, this spiritual mountain is so big. 3 days shouldn't be enough for them to search for treasures. How many spiritual treasures were there in this space crack? How could a nascent soul cultivator be willing to leave after 3 days? Maybe they have other reasons? Qingxi guessed. Mo Chinga thought for a while, then shook her head. I don't know. She then smiled and said, let's talk about it later. No matter what their plan is, we have our own purpose. Qingxi answered softly, then turned to look ahead. Let's go. If there are no accidents, we still need 1 more day. After walking through the canyon burning with earth pole real fire, they were already halfway up the mountain. In just 1 day they had already traveled more than half the distance. They didn't encounter anything too dangerous on the way, and instead they picked up some spiritual treasures. Their journey was extremely smooth. After leaving the canyon, they took a long detour to avoid a mass of primordial devil aura and then came to a forest. Although it was called a forest, it wasn't actually a tree but some thick vines. Their roots were intertwined like trees. Emochenga looked at the scene in front of her and unconsciously frowned. She seemed to have seen this before. This is a blood-eating vine. Fu Yaozi said to her with his divine comprehension. This kind of vine feeds on living things and devours flesh and blood, so it's full of spiritual aura. However, spiritual beasts also like to eat it to increase their cultivation level. If you raise a spiritual beast, it's really a great tonic. If you eat enough of it, you'll advance faster. Emochenga looked at it and suddenly remembered that when she went to the East Sea, she saw blood-eating vines on a small island. At that time, Xiaohua ate a lot of them. Later, she chopped some of them and left them in the virtual sky world. Xiaohua treasured those vines and stored them in its nest. It only ate a little every once in a while and it took a long time for it to finish them all. Thinking up to this point, she took out her flying sword and said to Qin Shi, "Let's chop some to take back." Qin Shi couldn't hear the conversation between her and Fu Yaozi, so he was puzzled. Why would I chop them back? Does this thing have any special use? Emochenga relayed Fu Yaozi's words to him. Qin Shi's interest was also piqued. Before she left, Emochenga left a lot of medicinal pills at Shenqing School. His bright bird advanced to the 7th rank because of them. If this blood-eating vine really had that kind of effect, maybe it could help his bright bird advance to the 8th rank. At that time, his strength would be greatly enhanced. Rank 8 spirit beasts were definitely not easy to raise. Once they were promoted to rank 8, they would gain spiritual intelligence. Even a spirit beast contract would be difficult to restrain them, unless the spirit beast egg recognized them as its master. However, spirit beasts had a long lifespan and advanced slowly. Even if a cultivator successfully cultivated to the nascent soul realm, by the time he passed away, the spirit beast might only be in the 5th or 6th rank. Therefore, a nascent soul cultivator with an 8th rank spirit beast was equivalent to having a nascent soul helper compared to other cultivators. Their strength could be imagined. That old donkey Ma, an individual cultivator in the late nascent soul realm, was a good example. Emochenga's flying sword chopped the thick vine. She felt her spiritual aura tremble and with a whoosh, a vine rolled towards her. She dodged sideways and controlled her flying sword to chop the same spot again. After doing this several times, she finally chopped the vine. This vine was even tougher than the one she encountered on the small island in the Eastern Sea. However, her cultivation level had improved greatly these past few years, so it wasn't as hard to deal with as before. Upon seeing this, Qin Shi pointed with his spiritual aura. A sword light separated from the sword formation and flew towards the vine with a whistling sound. When the sword light passed by, the vine was chopped. Seeing this, Emochenga was discouraged. "I've been chopping so hard, but you've only done this." Qin Shi smiled. Metal and fire are the nemesis of the wood attribute. Besides, his cultivation level wasn't just for show. How could it be the same? He said again, haven't you gotten used to it? You can just call me for this kind of thing. This isn't relying on me, it's just that each industry has its own specialization." Emochenga was stunned. She glanced at him and was speechless. He was right. She had to get used to it. When the two of them were together, some things didn't have to be done by herself. Obviously, it was easier for him to do it, so she just let him do it. In any case, it was a fact that he was stronger now and she also had her own strengths. It's about time. After chopping almost half of the blood-eating vines, Qin Shi finally stopped and put all the vines into a chinquan bag. There's a demonic beast. Emochenga seemed to have sensed something just as she put the blood-eating vines away. She turned her head and was startled. Qin Shi looked up and his expression changed. He instantly withdrew his sword aura and circled around the two of them. Not far from them, a demonic beast spread its wings and flew over. It circled around the blood-eating vine forest and looked at them. On a certain precipice on Mount Lingshan, Scholar Yu was frowning as he carefully studied the words carved on the wall. The two early-stage nascent soul cultivators from Yu Mountain Academy who entered this space with him, as well as Han Shizhi's group of 3, were also carefully searching or recording on the precipice. Han Shizhi held the nameless list in his hand and compared it one by one. He then slowly wrote something on it with the golden brush magic weapon in his hand. After a long time, he heaved a sigh of relief and said respectfully, "Teacher, I've finished recording." Scholar Yu answered, but his gaze still didn't move away. He continued to stare for a while then beckoned Han Shizhi. "Shizhi, come here." Yes. Han Shiji flew to Scholar Yu's side. Scholar Yu pointed at a line of words on the precipice and asked, "Do you recognize this kind of words?" Han Shiji's gaze fell on the direction Scholar Yu was pointing at with his folding fan. A hesitant expression appeared on his face. After thinking for a long time, he finally said, "I think these words are a bit familiar. They're very similar to Jin Yuan from the Middle Ages era, but they're not the same." Scholar Yu showed a satisfied smile. "You're really well read. These words must have evolved from Jin Yuan. Although we still can't understand them at the moment, we'll definitely understand the meaning given time." He paused for a while, then said, "I don't know what expert cast a brilliant spell on this precipice, but this passage of words can only be read and can't be copied. All of you memorize it. I hope we can restore it from memory after we leave this place." "Yes," the two nascent soul cultivators and Han Shiji answered. While the other three were memorizing the words on the precipice, Scholar Yu's gaze fell on the Immortal Palace. The nameless list was one of the 5 sacred objects passed down by Teacher Zhou. Everyone else thought this object was the same as the other 4 sacred objects, a top-grade spiritual treasure, but in fact it wasn't. It was just an ordinary book, but it recorded an extraordinary cultivation method. This cultivation method was incomplete and nameless. It was written down by Teacher Zhou based on his memory after he returned from the spatial rift in the Sea of Returning Ruins. Teacher Zhou wrote down his past experiences behind the nameless list. This cultivation method was obtained from the precipice of Mount Spirited in the spatial rift. However, an expert had cast a mysterious spell on the precipice. When one read it, they would only feel that every word was clear, but when they turned their heads, they would find that their minds were empty, unable to memorize it in the book. Only by continuously memorizing it would they be able to retain some of it in their minds. Although it was only an incomplete cultivation method, and even the words in it couldn't be completely deciphered, the incomplete content was enough to drive these Confucian cultivators crazy. Their most important goal was to find the complete cultivation method when the spatial rift opened this time. As for the Immortal Palace, that was naturally one of their goals. However, Scholar Yu knew that with that Fox Yuan Mu around, it would be impossible for the Yu Mountain Academy to obtain the greatest benefits. Instead of wasting their efforts, they might as well focus on completing the nameless list. As for the opportunity to become a soul formation cultivator, he naturally had to fight for it. However, he also had to leave a backup plan. Half a day later, Han Shiji finally stopped memorizing and looked at Scholar Yu. "Teacher, I've memorized it." Scholar Yu's gaze was drawn back from the Immortal Palace, and he said approvingly, "Shiji, you're indeed the most outstanding junior in the academy. No wonder Teacher Zhou would choose you as the master of the nameless list." "Teacher, you flatter me," Han Shiji said modestly without a hint of arrogance on his face. Scholar Yu smiled faintly, opened his folding fan and suddenly asked, "Shiji, judging from your expression, do you have any doubts?" Han Shiji paused for a moment, then said bluntly, "That's right, I do have some doubts in my heart. I hope Teacher can enlighten me." "Hee hee," Scholar Yu laughed softly and said, "I know what you want to ask. Actually, with your intelligence and wisdom, you can be called the #1 junior in the Yu Mountain Academy. However you..." He paused for a moment, then continued, "Sometimes being too smart will cause you to overlook other possibilities." Han Shiji paused for a moment, then bowed and asked, "I don't understand, Teacher, please enlighten me." Scholar Yu smiled and said, "Then let me ask you, we Confucians stand on the path of righteousness. Why do you want to take an unconventional path?" Han Shiji frowned slightly, but his expression was still respectful as he replied, "I believe that the so-called Tao is the heart, and the so-called right and wrong are also the heart. If the heart believes that there is no wrong, then it is the right path. The righteousness of Confucianism accepts the right and wrong of our predecessors, so there is a distinction between good and evil. However, I see right and wrong with my heart, so I'm also righteous, but I'm neither good nor evil." Scholar Yu smiled and said, "In short, your right and wrong are only related to yourself, and have nothing to do with others." Han Shiji nodded without hesitation, "Exactly." The first sentence was almost equivalent to denying the ancient Confucian morality. However, Scholar Yu didn't seem to blame him and still said in a gentle and refined manner, "Shiji, you've comprehended all this, which means that you're an extremely self-centered person. This isn't bad. There's not much difference between an extreme ego and absolute persistence, and persistence is a necessary condition for success. However, have you ever thought that your ego would make you overly greedy?" Han Shiji was stunned, looking at Scholar Yu, and didn't speak for a long time. Scholar Yu smiled and said, "After entering this space, Everyone has their own thoughts. Yuan Mu is like that, Wu Ming is like that, and that Guifeng is also like that. I don't believe that they would bet all their treasures on the so-called immortal palace. Is the so-called fate of immortals really worth risking our lives for? I'm afraid not. Chapter 460. At the top of the spiritual mountain, beside the immortal palace, the cultivators of Juyin sect sat cross-legged and focused on adjusting their breaths. There weren't many cultivators left in Juyin sect. 2 late-stage nascent soul cultivators, 3 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators, and Ling Yunhe, a junior in the late-stage core formation realm. The group of 6 didn't have the advantage in numbers among the cultivators who came to search for treasures. However, their cultivation levels were outstanding, so they were still the strongest team. At this moment, they were seizing the opportunity to cultivate before the others arrived at the immortal palace. The spiritual aura on the top of the spiritual mountain next to the immortal palace was abundant. Even the top-grade spirit veins in Yunzhong couldn't compare to it, so it was a rare opportunity. Ling Yunhe once asked Ling Xiyu out of curiosity, with such abundant spiritual aura in this space, wouldn't it be easier to make a realm breakthrough here? Ling Xiyu answered. That was true, but who would dare to do that? The most important thing for high-level cultivators to make realm breakthroughs wasn't the abundance of spiritual aura, but safety. With so many cultivators entering this place, where could they find a reliable immortal's cave for closed-door meditation? This wasn't their own territory, so there were too many variables. They're coming. Master Taoist Yuanmu suddenly moved and opened his eyes. Hearing the sound, the others stopped meditating and looked into the distance. 2 flight lights crossed the dense forest and appeared on the pure white snow, quickly approaching the immortal palace. One flight light was white and the other was red. The white one was pure and the red one was dazzling. There were also hundreds of sharp sword auras surrounding them, preventing the 10,000-year-old snow fog from approaching them. It's them? Ling Xiyu raised his eyebrows. With his divine sense, he had already distinguished that they were a nascent soul cultivator and a core formation cultivator. Among the cultivators who entered this space, only one party had such a combination. That fellow Taoist Mo really can't be underestimated. Ling Yunhe muttered to himself while looking at the 2 flight lights. He could see that the nascent soul cultivator didn't deliberately slow down. Under such circumstances, the flight light of the core formation cultivator still easily kept up with his speed. Even if they used the same flying magic weapon, she still needed to be very strong. Master Taoist Iron Mask, who had been silent, suddenly said, Yunhe, do you know what spiritual roots that female cultivator has and what cultivation technique she practices? Ling Yunhe was slightly startled. He bowed and answered, Martial Uncle Tai Mian, disciple doesn't know. However, she once made a deal with disciple in exchange for Danxia sect's Art of Sunu. Art of Sunu? Master Taoist Yuanmu narrowed his eyes. Could it be that she's... Ling Yunhe knew what he wanted to say next and said, Martial Uncle Yuanmu, disciple thinks that if she really has a pure Yin constitution, her actions are too bold. Plus, she's only a core formation cultivator, how could she hide from all of you? Not necessarily. Perfected Yunmu shook his head. This woman is courageous and insightful. She also has many numinous treasures on her. She might even dare to do so. She sighed again. What a pity. She already has a dual cultivation Dao companion, and her primordial Yin has already been lost. Even if that's the case, she doesn't have much value anymore. Heh, Junior Martial Brother Yuan Mu, enlightened Master Iron Mask said, it's not important whether this woman has a pure Yin constitution or not. What I find strange is why is her flight light white? Master Taoist Yuan Mu's expression turned serious. He looked at Master Iron Mask and said, Senior Martial Brother, you mean, a white flight light? This person either had some kind of fortuitous encounter or has a mixed spiritual root with all 5 elements. Junior Martial Brother, which one do you think it's? Master Taoist Yuanmu's expression gradually turned solemn. A white flight light represented the integration of all 5 elements. If one didn't have spiritual roots with all 5 elements, then the cultivation technique they practiced must also have 5 elements. In the cultivation world, choosing cultivation techniques based on one spiritual root was one of the laws. People without metal spiritual roots couldn't practice metal attribute cultivation techniques. If a special situation occurred, it meant that this person had an extremely great fated chance and broke through the laws. Since it was called a law, how could it be so easy to change? This fated chance was no small matter. If it was the second case, The reason why white flight lights were rarely seen was because cultivators with 5 spiritual roots were mostly stuck in the early stage of the aura refining realm for the rest of their lives. Only cultivators in the foundation building realm and above could fly. Among cultivators with 5 spiritual roots, only 1 in 10,000 could reach the foundation building realm, let alone the core formation realm. This woman was in the peak stage of the core formation realm, only 1 step away from the nascent soul realm. Master Taoist Iron Mask continued, I once saw a record in a predecessor's notebook. In the past, I only thought it was a rumor and didn't take it seriously. Now it seems that it might be true. He looked at Master Taoist Yuanmu. That number 1 person in Yunzhong, Senior Fu Yaozi, has a mixed spiritual root with all 5 elements. Master Taoist Yuanmu narrowed his eyes and looked sharply at Master Taoist Iron Mask. Really? No expression could be seen on Master Taoist Iron Mask's black iron mask, and his voice was also flat. That's right. After pondering for a long time, Master Taoist Yuanmu let out a long sigh and said, if this matter succeeds, we'll try our best to rope them in. If it fails, we absolutely can't let them take 1 step out of Immortal Palace. Although he didn't say why, the people present weren't ordinary people. They immediately understood what he meant and agreed in a low voice. The Fuxing sword recognized Fu Yaozi as its master. It turned out that they had something in common. That meant, this female cultivator was very likely to have inherited Fu Yaozi's teachings. Although they weren't afraid of Fu Yaozi as the number 1 cultivator in Yunzhong, there had to be something special about her. From what they saw, this female cultivator was both courageous and not stupid. Who could say for sure what kind of achievements she could achieve in the future? If what they wanted succeeded, it would be a good thing to be on good terms with her. But if it didn't, they were afraid she'd bear a grudge against them for scheming against her. At that time, to avoid making enemies for Jiyan sect, they could only eliminate her to avoid future troubles. While they were thinking, 2 flight lights approached Immortal Palace at an extremely fast speed. Several hundred flashing sword lights parted the snow fog. A man and a woman arrived in front of them in an instant. Ling Yunhe noticed that under Mo Chenga's feet, there was a faint glow from her boots. She wasn't using a flying magic weapon with Qin Shi. The cultivation technique he cultivated was very sensitive to the aura of spiritual treasures. Right now he was sure she flew all the way with her own ability. He sighed inwardly. The anger in his heart gradually calmed down. As it turned out, he was actually inferior to her. That being the case, why should he take it to heart? Seniors, you're early, Mo Chenga said with a smile. Together with Qin Shi, she greeted them. Master Taoist Yuanmu showed a flat smile. He said neither warmly nor coldly, you two aren't late either. It's only been 4 days but you've already arrived. You didn't stop on the way, right? Mo Chenga put on a fake smile. We husband and wife are weak and don't have the ability to covet anything. We can only rely on our fated chances on the way. Fortunately, our journey was smooth. We picked up some treasures and encountered a 9th-ranked demonic beast. A 9th-ranked demonic beast? Although they looked calm, a hint of surprise flashed in the eyes of Master Taoist Yuanmu and the others. There weren't many demonic beasts in this spiritual mountain, but if one appeared occasionally, it would be above the 8th rank. They had the advantage in numbers, so they weren't afraid. A 9th-ranked demonic beast was equivalent to a middle-stage nascent soul cultivator. The demonic beasts in this space lived and cultivated in places full of spiritual aura or turbulent devil aura all year round, so they were much stronger than those in the outside world. Not only did the 2 of them look uninjured, but they also didn't look the least bit disheveled. This kind of strength really couldn't be underestimated. So, fellow Taoists killed that demonic beast? Master Taoist Yuanmu asked. Qin Shi smiled faintly and said, I was just lucky. Fellow Taoist Qin is too modest. Master Taoist Yuanmu smiled and said politely, you and your wife are amazing. Even I wasn't completely sure about dealing with the 9th-ranked demonic beast here, but judging from your appearances, you killed it very easily. It seems it's really a blessing to have your help on this trip to Immortal Palace. You flatter me, Qin Shi responded. Listening to their conversation and looking at Master Taoist Yuanmu's current attitude, Mo Chenga laughed inwardly. Sure enough, she had to show a bit of her strength appropriately. Not long ago, she didn't even have the qualifications to talk about conditions in front of this Master Taoist Yuanmu. But now, with Qin Shi next to her and his extraordinary strength, this Master Taoist Yuanmu was a lot more polite. Fellow Taoist Ling, the others haven't arrived yet? Mo Chenga asked Ling Yunhe while Qin Shi was talking to the nascent soul cultivators from Jiyan sect. After all, there was a gap between their cultivation levels, so it was better to ask Ling Yunhe about some things. Ling Yunhe laughed and said, "After entering this space, how many people are willing to part with the spiritual treasures on the way? They should still be looking for treasures, right?" Emo Chenga blinked. Previously, Ling Yunhe always looked like he wanted to say something to her, but today he was so relaxed. Thinking this, she didn't show any abnormalities on her face and said with a smile, "Then what about fellow Taoist Ling? Are you and your masters willing to part with them?" Ling Yunhe shook his head and cast a glance at the foot of the mountain. "Fellow Taoist Mo, haven't you noticed that we're short of people? To tell you the truth, my martial uncles have gone to look for treasures under orders. It's just that martial uncle Yuanmu thinks the immortal fate in Immortal Palace is a big matter, so the spiritual treasures should be looked for by those martial uncles. It's more important for us to take care of business." Oh. This also made sense. After all, there were many people from Juyin sect, and they were the only ones who could divide their forces into two groups and ensure that the strength of both groups wasn't bad. By the way, fellow Taoist Mo just encountered a 9th-ranked demonic beast. I wonder how strong it was. We only saw one. That demonic beast saw that we had a lot of people, so it ran far away. While Ling Yunhe and Mo Chenga were chatting, the several nascent soul cultivators were exchanging pointers with Qin Shi. More than half a day later, some figures finally appeared in the white snow. A group of monks wearing monk robes and straw shoes, chanting Buddha's name on a lotus platform, hurried over. It was Venerable Avidya and Venerable Xuxiang. Everyone stood up. Master Taoist Yuanmu already went to greet them. "Fellow Taoist Avidya, you're finally here." He still didn't pay any attention to Venerable Xuxiang. Venerable Xuxiang also didn't care. Instead, he rushed to shout, "Old man Yuanmu, why did you come so early? There were a lot of natural treasures on the way. You're actually willing to part with them?" Master Taoist Yuanmu humphed and said, "I just arrived a little earlier than you. It's only been less than 5 days. You're really willing to part with them?" No matter how good the natural treasures are, they're not as important as a fated chance in the deification realm, right? I don't have a key. If I came late, wouldn't I be unable to enter? Master Taoist Yuanmu gave him a supercilious look and ignored him. Mo Chenga had already seen him before. This Venerable Xuxiang didn't have the demeanor of a great late-stage nascent soul cultivator. He talked nonsense and said everything. Most late-stage nascent soul cultivators didn't like to talk to him, and even the slick and smooth Master Taoist Yuanmu was no exception. Venerable Avidya chuckled and came out to smooth things over. "Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, you're really early. Fellow Taoist Qin, little friend Mo, you're also here." Chapter 461. Within a day or two, all the late-stage nascent soul cultivators arrived one after another, and the side of the Immortal Palace gradually became lively. Apart from them, the other middle-stage and early-stage nascent soul cultivators who entered the space didn't show up. This phenomenon was very normal. On one hand, although Master Taoist Yuanmu and the others invited them to enter the space, they had to rely on their own abilities to reach the Immortal Palace. There was no lack of dangerous places on Mount Lingshan, so some of them couldn't make it in time. On the other hand, there were spiritual treasures everywhere outside the Immortal Palace, so it was normal that many cultivators didn't want to get involved because there was a world of difference between the early stage and the late stage of the nascent soul realm. Although Master Taoist Yuanmu was usually kind, he wouldn't care about ordinary early-stage nascent soul cultivators or even middle-stage nascent soul cultivators attacking him together. They didn't have to wait too long. On the 6th day, Scholar Yu and the other cultivators from Yu Mountain Academy finally arrived. After some discussion, they decided to enter the Immortal Palace. At this time, apart from the late-stage nascent soul cultivators and their fellow disciples, only a few middle-stage and early-stage nascent soul cultivators had arrived. "Little friend Mo, can you tell us how to open this Immortal Palace?" In the deal with Yuanmu and the others, Mo Chenga's bargaining chip was the method to obtain the immortal fate and the specific path. Because the power of the holy objects left by the other 4-5 saints had declined, they didn't pass down all of their contents. This was also one of the reasons Yuanmu and the others had to agree with her. Mo Chenga nodded with a smile. "Of course." Then she looked up at Ling Yunhe and the others and said, "Fellow Taoists, please come here." The 4 of them glanced at their respective masters. After receiving instructions, they walked over. Mo Chenga took out a jade slip from her Qingkuan bag. The ancient restrictions on this Immortal Palace are very powerful. Back then, the 5 saints worked together but only came up with a method to temporarily open a passage. This passageway could only exist for 3 days. After 3 days, it would not be easy to open the passageway again. This is the jade slip recording the method. You should memorize it first. The first to take the jade slip was Ling Yunhe. He took it without hesitation and probed it with his divine sense. After a while he passed the jade slip to the next person. Next were Jiewu, Han Shizhi and Yang Qingji. When the 4 of them finished reading, Mo Qingge asked, "Do the 4 of you need some time to familiarize yourselves with this place?" Before the others could answer, Jiewu chuckled and said, "Benefactor Mo, this humble monk's aptitude is mediocre. I'm afraid I won't be able to grasp it in a short time and ruin Senior's plans. Please give me an hour to familiarize myself with the technique." Mo Qingge smiled and nodded. "Then we'll start in an hour." Since Jiewu said so, the others didn't say anything else. They each found a place to meditate, silently recited the incantation, and began to adjust their breathing. Qingge. She was a bit worried when he saw Mo Qingge coming back. "This method? Don't worry, it'll be fine." Mo Qingge knew what he wanted to say. The strength of this immortal palace's restriction was obvious to everyone. Breaking this kind of restriction would most likely require a great deal of power. The 5 of them were only core formation cultivators. If they suffered a backlash, they would certainly lose their lives immediately. They simply couldn't withstand that kind of power. However, it will be a little troublesome to enter. After pondering for a moment, she said, "I originally planned to borrow their strength to protect myself, but now that you're here, what's wrong? Is there a problem?" Mo Qingge glanced at the few late nascent soul cultivators and middle-stage cultivators around her and said, "I don't know if your sword formation can block the dangers inside the passage. You don't have to worry too much about this." Fu Yaozi's voice suddenly rang in her head. This senior martial brother's natal magic weapon should be a spiritual treasure inherited from the distant past era. It's been nourished by his blood essence for a long time, so its power is extraordinary. Furthermore, he practiced body-refining techniques, so passing through the passage shouldn't be a problem. "But Master, what about me?" "Ha." Fu Yaozi chuckled. "Did you forget what Master asked you to buy? Your meridians are strong, and together with the protective talismans I asked you to prepare, there shouldn't be any problems." "Qingge?" She called her again when he saw that she didn't answer for a long time. "It's all right. Master Fu Yaozi told me." "Oh." She was actually very curious. He knew there was a powerful divine sense on Fuxing's sword, but he never communicated with it. Sometimes when he listened to Mo Qingge's narration, he yearned for it even more. He wondered what kind of amazing cultivator the divine sense on the sword belonged to. An hour later, Ling Yunhe and the others stopped adjusting their breaths. Everyone looked at Jiewu, but he was still meditating with his eyes closed, concentrating on chanting. After waiting for a while, he finally breathed a sigh of relief and opened his eyes. He clasped his hands in front of his chest apologetically and said to Mo Qingge, "Benefactor Mo, I'm done." Mo Qingge nodded, then stood up and walked to the center. She then took out several formation discs from her robe and laid them outside the Immortal Palace's gate. All the nascent soul cultivators stared at her movements attentively. They were all very curious. Even with their cultivation levels, they couldn't see through the restrictions on the Immortal Palace. How could a core formation cultivator crack them, even with Fu Yaozi's guidance? Whoosh! The last formation flag fell, and the formation disc instantly shone with a white light. With a clear sound, a star chart appeared on the ground. Upon seeing this, Scholar Yu narrowed his eyes. He was knowledgeable and had dabbled in the Tao of formations, but he actually couldn't see through the mysteries of the formation she had set up. The 5 sages were indeed the 5 sages. Although he was now a late-stage nascent soul cultivator and was slightly stronger than the 5 sages from back then, he still couldn't see through the formation the 5 sages had set up. "Seniors," Mo Qingge said loudly to Yuan Mu and the others, "our cultivation levels aren't high enough, so we still need you to protect us. If any of us doesn't have enough spiritual aura, please lend us a helping hand." "Of course," Master Taoist Yuan Mu said, "little friend Mo doesn't need to worry about this." Mo Qingge smiled. This was related to the opening of the Immortal Palace, so she expected they'd all do their best. She turned around and said to Ling Yunhe and the others, "Fellow Taoists, let's start." The 4 of them nodded, stood at the 5 corners of the formation, and took out their holy objects. Just like how they used to open the space, the 5 of them chanted an incantation. With a buzzing sound, the 5 holy objects each emitted a white light. However, this time, the powerful spiritual aura exploded from the 5 holy objects and poured into the formation under their feet with the 5 of them as the mediators. Emo Chinga frowned, enduring the pain caused by the powerful spiritual aura passing through her meridians. She had gone through the 5 spirits cultivation technique, so her meridians were strong, so this kind of pain wasn't unbearable. However, the other 4 weren't so lucky. Different degrees of pain appeared on their faces, especially Yang Qingji and Ju Wu. Their cultivation levels were the lowest, so they suffered the most. All the nascent soul cultivators stared at the 5 of them, and Guifeng Devil Monarch and Revered Avidya looked even more concerned. Seeing that the aura from the holy objects was getting weaker and weaker, and their faces were getting paler and paler, Master Taoist Yuanmu took a step forward and hit Ling Yunhe with his palm. As soon as he moved, Revered Avidya and the others immediately stepped forward. Master Taoist Iron Mask from Juyin sect looked at Qin Shi and asked, "Fellow Taoist Qin, do you need me to do it for you?" The other 4 all had elders in the late stage of the nascent soul realm. Only Mo Chenga and Qin Shi were in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, and they seemed to have just advanced to the middle stage. Qin Shi shook his head and cupped his hands at him. "Fellow Taoist, I appreciate your kindness." After he finished speaking, he took a step forward and also hit Mo Chenga. The cultivation technique they practiced was yin and yang, so in the process of transferring spiritual aura, they didn't consume much and benefited a lot. Master Taoist Iron Mask didn't know about this. He only thought Qin Shi was worried, so he didn't insist. With a nascent soul cultivator continuously transferring spiritual aura, the 5 of them finally looked a lot better. As time passed, the formation under their feet became brighter and brighter. Eventually, the light from the holy objects slowly faded, and the formation emitted a dazzling light as if it had eaten its fill of spiritual aura. In the light, a dark hole the size of a person appeared. The cultivators were overjoyed when they saw the entrance. Mo Chenga breathed a sigh of relief. It was finally done. "Seniors," she said loudly, "Junior has to remind you that this passage is very dangerous. If you don't have a powerful defensive magic weapon, please be careful when you enter." "Little friend Mo, rest assured," Master Taoist Yuanmu said faintly, "you've all become great nascent soul cultivators, so you all understand this principle. Fated chances all depend on fate. Even if you die here, you can't blame others." "Exactly. How could we not understand what little friend Mo understands?" Revered Avidya smiled. "Little friend Mo, you said before, are we going together?" Mo Chenga smiled. The condition of her previous deal was to tell them how to find fated chances to become immortals. Opening the immortal palace was only the first step. With their mutual trust, these people wouldn't believe her words and would definitely want her to go with them lest she schemed against them. Of course, but... She glanced at the cultivators around her. There were so many people here. Aside from the 3 clans who negotiated the conditions, there were also many late-stage nascent soul cultivators. She couldn't afford to offend them. In the end, Master Taoist Yuanmu said loudly, "Fellow Taoists, Mr. Yu and fellow Taoist Avidya invited you to explore the secret place together. Now we've fulfilled our promise. Once we enter this passage, we'll search for fated chances to become immortals based on our own abilities. What do you think?" "Old Yuanmu, why are you talking so much nonsense? We old guys have lived for so many years. Don't tell me we don't even understand these principles? All right, you've already done your best. Whether we can enter or not, whether we can find it or not, it's all fate. Who would blame you?" Revered Avidya waved his hand impatiently. He looked like a boorish man, but after living for so long and cultivating to the late stage of the nascent soul realm, how could he not see it? They had holy objects in their hands, so there must be some secrets that they wouldn't share with others. Miaoying Progenitor said with a smile, "Fellow Taoist Avidya is right. Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, we don't have much time. Let's not waste it." Master Taoist Yuanmu nodded and said, "If that's the case, I won't be polite. Juyin sect will go first. Does anyone have any objections?" Juyin sect had holy objects and was the strongest, so the others naturally wouldn't have any objections. The 5 nascent soul cultivators of Juyin sect each used their own methods and released their magic weapons to protect the cloud-soaring crane as they entered the passage first. After them were the 3 nascent soul cultivators of Yu Mountain Academy and Han Shizhi, followed by Guifeng Devil Monarch and Yang Qingji. Before entering the passage, Revered Avidya turned to Mo Chenga and Qin Shi and put his palms together. "Fellow Taoist Qin, do you too want to go with us?" After entering this space, there were several early-stage nascent soul cultivators from Huayan Temple. Right now, none of them were here, so Revered Avidya was the only one who seemed enlightened. She glanced at Mo Tienga. When he saw her nodding, he smiled and said, "Since Master has sincerely invited us, we'll accept it." Chapter 462. Protective Spiritual Talismans, White Silk Handkerchief, Art of the Origin, all kinds of defensive methods were used. By the time Mo Tienga finished her preparations, she had already summoned his 3-yang real fire sword, transforming it into a sword aura formation. He also used a spiritual talisman. Venerable Avidya and Enlighten were much simpler. Their Buddhist cultivation techniques included body refining techniques. At this moment, Venerable Avidya chanted the name of Buddha and flicked the prayer beads in front of his chest. A pure and holy Buddhist light bloomed from his fingers and surrounded the 4 of them. She cupped his hands and bowed to Venerable Avidya. "Thank you, Master." Venerable Avidya smiled. His eyes were still closed and his expression was kind. Mo Tienga knew the reason the other party acted like this was most likely because of the inescapable net incident. He wanted to return the favor. Venerable Avidya said Enlightened cultivated Zen. She didn't know much about Buddhist cultivators, but judging from his words he should be a relatively gentle Buddhist cultivator. Venerable Avidya's way of doing things was also different from those selfish cultivators. Aside from protecting himself, he didn't hesitate to help others. Thinking about it this way, if there was no fundamental conflict of interests, the 2 of them would be good partners. After setting up several defensive methods, the 4 of them walked into the passage one by one. As soon as they entered the passage, all the light seemed to be swallowed in an instant. There was nothing except the faint light emitted by the 3-yang real fire sword and the protective aura shield. In the darkness, Mo Tienga felt her hand tighten. It was she holding her hand tightly. He whispered, "Be careful not to get separated." She felt warmth in her heart and responded with a smile. This passage wasn't the transporting formation at the entrance. Instead, it was a special space created by temporarily breaking the restrictions with the power of the formation. In real space, the 2 ends of the passage might be separated by a door, but in this passage they might have to walk a long way. In other words, this was also a space crack created by tearing space, independent of the outside world. Tearing space. This definitely wasn't a spell that existed in the modern cultivation world. Only the cultivators of the Middle Ages knew this kind of great void-shattering divine ability. Because of this, no matter how knowledgeable Scholar Yu was, he couldn't see the mystery of Mo Tienga's formation. Of course, the activation technique used by the 5 saints back then was not the real void-stomping technique. Truly crushing the void and tearing the space apart was similar to the virtual sky world, which created an independent and stable space that formed a cycle of its own, just like a small world. As for this restriction-breaking formation, the spatial tearing technique it used was only the tip of the iceberg. The space it created was unstable and filled with danger. Furthermore, it could only be maintained for a short period of time. However, for the current cultivation world, this kind of method was already a shocking magical power. This was an incomplete spell that Fu Yaozi had obtained from an ancient cultivator's cave. It was also the reason why he was able to obtain the greatest opportunity in the Immortal Palace. Not long after they entered the passage they heard sounds. Mo Tienga turned around and saw that the drifting restrictions outside were hitting everyone's defensive barriers. Shi furrowed his brows and said softly, "What a powerful restriction. If our defensive methods weren't good enough, I'm afraid it would have been broken." Revered Avidya, who was sitting on the lotus platform in front of them, laughed and said, "Fellow Taoist Qin's sword formation is very powerful. This old monk has underestimated it." "Master, you're too polite." She smiled. "If it weren't for Master's help, I wouldn't have it so easy." As soon as the 2 of them finished talking, they saw the Buddha light barrier outside shaking. Revered Avidya paused for a moment, then pinched the Buddha beads in his hand. Buddha's light appeared faintly on his hand, and the barrier immediately stabilized. Shi didn't stay out of this. He pointed with his spiritual aura, and his sword aura turned into thousands of sword lights, covering the barrier. Although Mo Tienga and Ju Wu weren't directly attacked inside the barrier, they both felt the pressure from the restrictions outside. The spiritual aura pressure in the darkness passed through the outermost Buddha light and sword lights. This invisible pressure directly suppressed their primordial spirits, making them unconsciously turn pale. Upon realizing this, Mo Tienga silently operated the soul-refining art. Her soul-refining art had already reached the 3rd layer. If she used it with all her strength, the spiritual aura pressure she emitted would far surpass that of cultivators in the same realm as her. Now that she operated it, she immediately felt the pressure lighten. Little friend Mo's secret techniques are really amazing. No wonder you dared to come all the way to Yunzhong alone and even bargain with us old guys. Revered Avidya's voice came. Mo Chinga was stunned and couldn't help but feel a bit helpless. This old monk usually closed his eyes to make others think he was blind, but in the end he didn't even turn his head. He could even clearly sense her using the soul-refining art. His Buddhist name really shouldn't be Avidya, it should be Tai Ming. Although she thought that way, she still politely replied, "Senior, you flatter me. Junior only obtained these secret techniques by chance and by being a bit diligent." Hee hee. Revered Avidya chuckled. Well said. Aren't fated chances and diligent factors essential to becoming a great cultivator? Little friend has fated chances and knows how to be diligent. Seeing that you have such a cultivation level at such a young age, your comprehension and aptitude must be good. Your future is really boundless. Mo Chinga felt a bit embarrassed after being praised like this. Junior doesn't deserve Senior's praise. Compared to a great cultivator like Senior, Junior hasn't even reached the nascent soul realm yet. In this old monk's opinion, little friend will advance to the nascent soul realm soon, right? Revered Avidya said calmly, maybe before this old monk passes away, I'll be able to see little friend become a late-stage great cultivator. Today I'll also form a good karma for the disciples of Huayan Temple. Mo Chinga thought this revered Avidya was really far-sighted. Although she believed she could advance to the nascent soul realm, she didn't dare to think about becoming a late-stage nascent soul cultivator. After all, the path of cultivation after the nascent soul realm was much more difficult than cultivating to the nascent soul realm. She never expected this revered Avidya would think so highly of her and use his status as a late-stage nascent soul cultivator to form a good karma with her. It was her own mistake to overlook this. She was only a core formation cultivator, and even if she advanced to the nascent soul realm, she was nothing in the eyes of a top cultivator in the human realm like revered Avidya. However, she had Qin by her side. Not only was he her Tao companion now, but he was also her senior martial brother. Since her sect could cultivate a great cultivator like Qin, it must also be a big sect in the outer endless sea, so it was worth it for him to form a good karma with her. After all, although Huayan Temple was a big Buddhist sect, it wasn't as rich and overbearing as Juyan's sect. Master, you think too highly of my wife. I'm still far from becoming a late-stage great cultivator. Qin said with a smile. Although he was being modest, he only said it was far. Revered Avidya turned his head and gave them a meaningful look. Fellow Taoist Qin, you're very confident. Just as he finished speaking and before Qin could answer, a soft sound suddenly rang out. Ju Wu grunted and was about to fall from the lotus platform. Revered Avidya's movements were extremely fast. He waved his kasaya, rolled Ju Wu up, and placed him on the lotus platform. Then he moved the 5 fingers of his left hand, performing a set of hand seals. A golden light sprinkled on Ju Wu's body. In just a few breaths, Ju Wu woke up with a groan. He stood up with a bit of shame, lowered his head and said, "Martial uncle, I'm useless. You don't have to be like this." Revered Avidya's tone was gentle, and his expression didn't change. With your cultivation level and the divine light protecting you, it'd still be very difficult for you to stay unscathed in this passage. But benefactor Mo Shi. He glanced back at Mo Chinga, whose expression was a bit grave. Little friend Mo is different from you, Revered Avidya said simply. Then he pinched a Buddha bead from his chest and chanted the name of Buddha. An incomparably powerful and holy aura burst from the Buddha bead, forcing even the drifting restrictions nearby to retreat a bit. Revered Avidya pinched the Buddha bead with his fingertips, forcibly crushing it and slapping it on Ju Wu's body. Martial uncle. Ju Wu was taken aback when he saw the golden light protecting him. It's just a worldly possession. You don't need to feel sorry for it. This was all Revered Avidya said. Mo Chinga and Qin glanced at each other. The two of them understood that this string of Buddha beads must be Revered Avidya's natal magic weapon. It was merely one of them, but it already had such an imposing aura. The strength of a great late nascent soul cultivator was indeed unfathomable. With the help of Revered Avidya's Buddha beads, the situation was temporarily stabilized. The 4 of them advanced in the passage in an orderly manner. However, the real danger came on the next part of the passage. If it was just a drifting restriction, even slightly stronger early-stage nascent soul cultivators could pass through it. Fu Yaozi wouldn't have needed to remind them like that. It was only now that the 4 of them realized the danger of this passage wasn't a lie. Rumble. The sound of wind and thunder resounded in the darkness. Then, without any warning, a hurricane suddenly attacked them. Shi's expression changed slightly. The sword aura around them let out a soft cry and flashed with red light. It was almost taken away from its original position. As for revered Avidya's Buddha light barrier, it even shook a little as if it would break in the next moment. Even though she had all kinds of secret techniques to protect herself, Chenga felt suffocated. She felt the enormous pressure almost crushing her. Even if her strength surpassed cultivators in the same realm as her, she wasn't a nascent soul cultivator after all, so she couldn't resist this kind of pressure at all. On the contrary, because of revered Avidya's Buddha beads, she was still standing firmly on the lotus platform. But at this time even she couldn't take care of her. With a solemn expression, he used all his strength to control the sword formation to resist the hurricane. Chenga continuously patted several talismans on her body and put away the white silk handkerchief to protect herself tightly. Then she took out medicinal pills from her Chengkuan bag and swallowed them regardless of how many there were. This way the pressure finally lessened a little. She heaved a sigh of relief and kept up with the journey so as not to cause more trouble. The hurricane grew bigger and bigger. Rumble. Thunder began to rumble frequently, carrying an incomparably shocking momentum, exploding around them. But such a shocking thunder couldn't tear apart the darkness. It was as if this was a bottomless pit with no exit. Heavenly thunder. She whispered. Chenga's expression changed slightly. Heavenly thunder. Could it be heavenly tribulation thunder? Thunder spells had always been the most destructive spell in the cultivation world. In terms of power, it wasn't necessarily stronger than fire spells, but it was easier to break through defenses and hit the weak points than fire spells. Therefore, heavenly tribulation was usually thunder tribulation, so one could imagine how terrifying thunder spells were. Amit Ba. Revered Avidya suddenly shouted. His Buddhist name was like thunder, and his voice coincided with the heavenly thunder, turning into sound waves that suppressed the sound of the heavenly thunder. Shi's movements weren't slow either. His sword light instantly turned into sword aura, and deep blue flames sprang out of his arms. Extreme Yang Real Fire was injected into the 3 Yang Real Fire sword to fight against the hurricane and the lightning. Rumble. Chi. The sound was endless. Chenga tried her best to protect herself and followed him closely. This kind of danger lasted for a long time. Finally, a white light appeared in front of them. In an instant, the thunder disappeared, the hurricane disappeared, and the rich spiritual aura rushed toward them. Chapter 463. Fellow Taoists, you came so quickly. Master Taoist Yuan Mu was slightly surprised to see the 4 of them. We were just lucky. Venerable Wuming said with a smile. His gaze swept over the people present and his white eyebrows twitched. He asked, Fellow Taoist Yuan Mu, what's going on? The first 3 groups to enter the Immortal Palace were 6 people from Zhiyin sect, 4 from Yushan Academy, and Devil Monarch Guifeng and his disciple. Now, the 2 middle-stage nascent soul cultivators from Zhiyin sect seemed to be seriously injured and were sitting cross-legged to regulate their breaths. Yushan Academy even lost an early-stage cultivator. Even Devil Monarch Guifeng's expression was very unsightly, especially when he saw the 4 of them coming out of the passage safely without any injuries. Yu Shuxing's expression turned gloomy. Master Taoist Yuan Mu also looked uneasy. He said, I can only blame myself for underestimating the dangers in the passage. I was too careless and caused my 2 junior martial brothers to be injured. Chenga and Shi glanced at each other and exchanged glances. The hurricane in the passage was indeed powerful. If they were careless, it was normal to get injured. Zhiyin sect sent 2 late-stage and 3 middle-stage cultivators, yet 2 of them were seriously injured on the way to the Immortal Palace. No wonder Master Taoist Yuan Mu looked so unsightly. As for Yushan Academy, the missing early-stage cultivator probably died in the passage, and the other early-stage cultivator seemed to be seriously injured. Yu Shuxing miscalculated this time. Yushan Academy couldn't compare to Zhiyin sect. They only brought 2 early-stage nascent soul cultivators to help. Now, one was dead and the other was injured, so they were basically useless. Venerable Wuming lowered his head and chanted the name of Buddha. He sighed and said, What a pity, what a pity. I didn't expect fellow Taoist Wuming and fellow Taoist Qin to actually work together. You 2 led 2 juniors and still passed the passage safely. What a blessing, Yu Shuxing said. He sounded like he was rejoicing, but he was also gnashing his teeth. Venerable Wuming naturally wouldn't get angry. He smiled and said, Our Huayan Temple's cultivation technique is a bit weak. Fortunately, our body refining technique is pretty good. Yu Shuxing knew Venerable Wuming was right. He was in a bad mood to vent his anger, so he just snorted and no longer said anything. Master Taoist Yuan Mu swept his gaze over Qin Shi and Imo Chenga with a complicated expression on his face. Although the other party's strength was slightly weaker, he had Fu Yaozi's divine sense and had made preparations beforehand, so it wasn't strange for him to pass through safely. Fellow Taoists. Perfected Yuan Mu quickly raised his spirits and said, "We are only one step ahead. There are still many fellow Taoists behind us. If we delay any longer, it will not be a good thing." Yu Shuxing quickly calmed down and nodded. "That's right. Since we have the holy relic in our hands, we should seize the initiative. In that case, in Mr. Yu's opinion, what should we do next?" Yu Shuxing's expression darkened when he heard this. He glanced at the heavily injured cultivators and said, "Why do you ask when you already know the answer?" Immortal Yuan Mu sighed and said, "I have no choice but to ask my injured junior brothers to wait here. Time is of the essence. I hope you can understand." 2 people from Juyin sect were seriously injured, one from Yushan Academy was dead and one was injured, while the other 3 parties were unscathed. Of course, they would not object to enlightened Master Yuan Mu's suggestion. As for the 3 cultivators, although they were somewhat unwilling, they were also helpless. They were all sect cultivators and understood that the overall situation was more important. Now, they would only be a burden to their sect, so they could only give in. However, there must be a lot of fated chances in the Immortal Palace. If they looked for another path, they might have a chance. Thinking of this, a middle-stage cultivator from Juyin sect reluctantly said, "Senior Martial Brother Yuan Mu is right. This matter is of great importance. We will wait here for your good news." The understanding of his fellow disciples made enlightened Master Yuan Mu's expression lighten up. He immediately said warmly, "Junior brothers, don't be disheartened. The matter of immortal opportunity cannot be determined. It is possible for it to fall on anyone's head. No matter what, we will meet here in 3 days and leave the Immortal Palace together." "Yes, Senior Martial Brother Yuan Mu." The cultivator from Yushan Academy also nodded at Yu Shuxing. The 3 cultivators who had been abandoned all had gloomy expressions on their faces. Although enlightened Master Yuan Mu's comfort was not unreasonable, they all knew that the possibility was too small. After making a decision, the group quickly regrouped. They had just entered the Immortal Palace, but 4 cultivators were missing. Now, there were only 4 people from Jiyin sect and 2 people from the other 4 sects, so there were only 12 people in total. Among them, 5 were late-stage nascent soul cultivators, 2 were middle-stage nascent soul cultivators, and 5 were core formation cultivators. Such a team would be very terrifying in the entire mortal realm. There were only 11 late-stage nascent soul great cultivators in Yunzhong. However, everyone's heart was heavy. They were forced to abandon their companions when they just entered the Immortal Palace. For them, the top great cultivators in the mortal realm who had been able to call the wind and summon the rain for 1,000 years, this was indeed a disgrace. They couldn't help but think of the 5 saints of that year. Their strength hadn't reached their peak yet, but they all retreated from the Immortal Palace unscathed. Sure enough, their talents were not just limited to cultivation. Little friend Imo enlightened Master Yuan Mu looked at Imo Chenga. "You should know this route, right?" Imo Chenga nodded and said, "This spiritual mountain was the mountain gate of a big ancient cultivation sect, and this Immortal Palace was its base. According to Senior Fu Yaozi's guidance, there are 3 places for immortal opportunities. The first is the pill concocting room, the second is the sutra depository, and the third is the storehouse. There are certainly immortal pills from the distant past in the pill concocting room, but those immortal pills are too old and can't be taken anymore. If we go to the pill concocting room, we'll only see the pill concocting tools from the distant past. Of course, there are also some spiritual treasures like pill cauldrons, but the valuable ones have all been taken away by the 5 saints of that year." "What about the sutra depository and the storehouse?" Yu Shuxing asked. Imo Chenga raised the corner of her mouth and said, "The 5 saints haven't really touched the sutra depository, but there are many restrictions inside, so it's also very dangerous. Seniors are all late-stage nascent soul great cultivators, so I'm afraid it'll be very difficult for you to find cultivation techniques that are helpful to you." "Little friend Imo, you don't have to worry about this." Master Taoist Yuan Mu's expression was solemn as he said slowly, "We old fellows have been stuck in the late-stage nascent soul realm for at least a few hundred years. If we can't make a breakthrough, no matter how high our cultivation levels are now, we'll just be a pile of bones when the time comes. We know very well whether this risk is worth it or not." Imo Chenga nodded. Just as she was about to continue speaking, she heard Demon Monarch Guifeng, who had been silent all this time, say, Little friend Emo, looking at the layout of this immortal palace, it should be a Tao cultivation sect, right? Wouldn't it be useless to devil cultivators like us? Tao cultivation sects naturally stored Tao secret manuals, while Confucianism and Buddhism had doctrines that were similar to those of Tao cultivation, so they could also be cultivated. However, devil cultivators were the opposite. They couldn't be used at all. Mo Chinga said, Senior Guifang, since Demon Venerable Tianyao could obtain fated chances from here, you can naturally do the same. A real big sect wouldn't only store their own cultivation techniques. Of course, if Senior thinks there's no need to take this risk, I have nothing to say. Entering this immortal palace was voluntary. If Demon Monarch Guifang gave up, there would be one less person to share the benefits with, and the others would be very happy. Sure enough, Demon Monarch Guifang said, I'm just asking. Little friend Mo, why are you so anxious? Mo Chinga smiled and continued, as for the storehouse, it's naturally the most important thing in a sect. Senior Fuyazi said that the cultivator with the highest cultivation level in this sect definitely isn't just in the deification realm. Therefore, the restrictions in the storehouse also far surpass those in the deification realm. With Senior's cultivation levels, the most you can do is break the restrictions in the nascent soul realm and obtain the corresponding treasures. Although they were only treasures in the nascent soul realm, how could the treasures of the distant past compare to today's treasures? Once they heard this, everyone's eyes lit up. Little friend Mo, Master Taoist Yuan Mu asked, could it be that the 5 sages didn't take away all the nascent soul realm treasures? Mo Chinga said, when the 5 sages entered the immortal palace, they spent a lot of effort to reach the storehouse. They weren't strong enough, so they only took away a portion of the treasures. Fellow Taoists who inherited the holy objects should know this. Ling Yunhe was the first to nod. That's right. The holy objects the 4 of them owned didn't leave behind strong divine senses, so they only had a rough idea of where the immortal opportunity was. Unlike Mo Chinga, Fuyazi's divine sense hadn't dispersed yet, so he even knew the route clearly. If they didn't have Mo Chinga on this trip, they'd probably lose most of their strength when they found the sutra depository or the storehouse. At that time, it would be hard to say how many treasures they'd be able to take away. Since that's the case, there's no time to lose. Let's set off now, Master Taoist Yuan Mu said as he looked at the glittering passageway. They'd been delayed for a while, but more people were about to come in. They didn't know whether there were cultivators who died in the passageway. No one was willing to waste time. After the group finished organizing, they quickly set off. The immortal palace was majestic and magnificent with lofty buildings. The big parts were grand and the small parts were exquisite. Just from the architecture alone, one could tell that the cultivation group this immortal palace belonged to definitely wasn't a small one. Inside the immortal palace, there were plazas, memorial arches, gardens, long streets and halls. It could be said that this was practically a small city, so there were all kinds of buildings here. Mo Chinga judged that this immortal palace was almost as big as 10 of Xianqing School's main peaks combined. Presumably, the cultivators of this cultivation group all lived here in the past, unlike Xianqing School where they lived on separate peaks. After entering the immortal gate, they saw a huge plaza that could accommodate more than 10,000 people. The entire immortal palace was built with high-grade ice attribute spirit stones. The entire plaza was as white as snow and overflowing with spiritual aura like a glacier or a snowfield. A group of 12 people walked through the plaza. All of them felt the dense spiritual aura around them, which was almost visible to the naked eye. Ling Yunhe raised his head and looked around. He blurted out, could it be that this cultivation group specializes in cultivating ice attribute cultivation techniques? There are so many high-grade ice attribute spirit stones here. If cultivators with ice spiritual roots cultivate here, how could these nascent soul cultivators not have thought of this? Ling Xiu sighed. Unfortunately, none of us have ice spiritual roots. Demon Monarch Guifang raised the corner of his mouth and said coldly, that girl Yi Shuang should be happy. She's a cultivator with ice spiritual roots. He was talking about Demon Monarch Yi Shuang, the city lord of Yexiao City. Ha! Yu Shuxing chuckled and said, unfortunately the immortal palace's passage can only be opened for 3 days. Otherwise, it would have been great for fellow Taoist Yi Shuang to cultivate here. While the nascent soul cultivators were chatting, Mo Chinga suddenly thought of a problem. She used her divine sense to ask Fu Yaozi, Master, since this immortal palace is built with ice attribute spirit stones, why is the sacrificial temple below worshipping the vermilion bird? The azure dragon was wood, the white tiger was metal, the vermilion bird was fire, the black tortoise was water, and the qilin was earth. This was an ice-attribute immortal palace, so why was it built on top of the fire-attribute vermilion bird sacrificial temple? Chapter 464. It's very simple. Fu Yaozi answered, you know spiritual aura of the same attribute is helpful for cultivation, but do you know that spiritual aura of the opposite attribute can balance the spiritual aura circulation in the body and stimulate the absorption of spiritual aura? Emo Chenga was a little stunned, but then she remembered that her and Qinshi's cultivation techniques were yin and yang, so they complemented each other. This immortal palace is a relic from the distant past era. There were also many relics from the distant past era, so they also advocated the way of balance, Fu Yaozi added. I see. She thought for a moment, then asked, Master, in that case, aren't the cultivation techniques left in this immortal palace very beneficial to me? Yes, the way of balance recorded inside is very beneficial to us. Fu Yaozi chuckled and said, of course the art of the origin mainly existed in the distant past era. Most of it was lost in the distant past era, and the mainstream cultivation method at that time has become the current one. This distant past era cultivation group probably recruited disciples with water spiritual roots so that they could practice ice attribute cultivation techniques. Emo Chenga remembered Zhengfa sect in the northernmost glacier. They recruited disciples with water spiritual roots, and their cultivation techniques were all water and ice attribute. There were many such cultivation groups in the cultivation world that had unique requirements for their disciples. For example, Danding School recruited disciples with fire spiritual roots because cultivators with fire spiritual roots would be more talented in pill concocting. Although Spirit Beast Sect, one of the 7 great cultivation groups in the Celestial Pole, didn't have any requirements for spiritual roots, they had to be talented in learning the language of beasts, which was more difficult than the requirements for spiritual roots. After safely passing through the square without any accidents, the group of 12 felt a little relieved. At this time, several white lights flashed in the passage at the entrance of the Immortal Palace, and the figures of other cultivators appeared. Although the passage was very dangerous, the cultivators who could reach the Immortal Palace weren't weak, especially those in the late nascent soul stage. Even if they were careless, it wouldn't be a problem for them to enter the Immortal Palace. After passing through the square and a large hall, layers of pavilions appeared in front of them. At first glance they couldn't see the end of it. Master Taoist Yuanmu narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, divine sense is actually forbidden here? The other nascent soul cultivators all looked solemn. They had also discovered this point. In this place they were unable to extend their divine senses. Once they extended their divine senses, they would be blocked by an invisible barrier. Ling Yun has said, it's not surprising that there are restrictions that restrict one's divine sense in the ancient great sections. After all, it's an important place in the sect. If everyone used their divine sense, it would be too casual. Perfected being Yuan Mu nodded when he heard that. That was indeed the case. Even the Jian sect had this kind of restriction, let alone the ancient sects. However, those above the core formation stage were not restricted. He said, however, even after such a long time, there are no signs of weakening. As expected of an ancient restriction. Scholar Yu furrowed his brows and said, furthermore, even the spiritual sense of a nascent soul cultivator is restricted. I really don't know how powerful the cultivators of this sect are. Everyone else had the same thoughts, and they felt even more anticipation towards the goal of this trip. Seeing as the cultivation bases of the high-grade cultivators in this sect were unfathomable, there was a much greater chance that they would be able to attain the opportunity to reach the deity transformation stage. Seniors, please come this way, Emo Chenga said. Perfected being Yuan Mu said politely, little friend Emo, please lead the way. Emo Chenga smiled but didn't say anything. She took the lead and stepped onto the veranda. Upon seeing this, Qinshi shook his sleeves to protect her with a sword formation while he followed closely behind her. Logically speaking, she was only a core formation cultivator. With a late-stage nascent soul cultivator present, it wasn't her turn to be the vanguard. However, everyone else was wary of her. After all, in this small team they were all competitors. When the time came, they might even turn against each other and become enemies in order to seize the immortal fate. Who knew if she would play any tricks when she showed them the way, so they naturally had to be on guard. After walking for a while, they bypassed a small courtyard and arrived at a garden. Suddenly, the view in front of them became clear. Devil Aura. Master Taoist Yuanmu exclaimed as soon as they stepped into the garden. This garden wasn't big, it should only be the private garden of an ancient cultivator. In the flowerbed of the garden, There were both ornamental spiritual flowers and medicinal spiritual herbs. After hundreds of thousands of years without the care of an owner, they had long fallen into disuse. Only a few remnants were left, growing crookedly. Although these spiritual herbs didn't grow well, the spiritual aura in this immortal palace was very rich. Moreover, they had been here for a long time, so they were worth picking. Unfortunately, there were several clouds of devil aura visible to the naked eye scattered in the garden, eroding these spiritual flowers and spiritual herbs until they lost their spirituality. This devil aura was very solid and had a strange aura, different from the devil aura scattered in any devil domain. Seeing this devil aura, everyone's gaze fell on Guifang Demon Monarch. Guifang Demon Monarch frowned. A puzzled expression appeared on his gentle and fair face. He said, "The devil aura in this space is very strange. It seems to be much more brilliant than the devil aura we cultivate." He only said this one sentence before he shut up. "Scholar," you asked, "anything else?" Guifang Demon Monarch glanced at him, then shook his head. "Nothing else. I've never come into contact with this kind of devil aura, so I can't explain it. On the other hand, Mr. Yu has always been erudite and multi-talented. I wonder if you've heard of him?" Scholar, you didn't know. He just shook his head and said no more. Fellow Taoists," Venerable Avidya said with a smile. This old monk realized that this devil aura seems familiar. Master Taoist Yuanmu raised his eyebrows and stared at him. "Fellow Taoist Avidya, the characteristic of your Buddhist cultivation techniques is to restrain devil aura. Have you seen it before?" "In fact, everyone has." Venerable Avidya suddenly opened his eyes and looked at Qin Shi. "Fellow Taoist Qin, am I right?" Under the gazes of the 6 nascent soul cultivators, Qin Shi nodded. "Yes." Mo Chenga remembered that when she was attacked by Mei Feng, Venerable Avidya saved her. Presumably, he had a deeper impression of primordial devil aura because of that. With this reminder, Master Taoist Yuanmu immediately remembered. The devil cultivator fellow Taoist Qin killed. The expressions of the nascent soul cultivators changed. The more they thought about it, the more certain they were, and the more vigilant they looked at Qin Shi. This devil aura was so brilliant, but that middle-stage nascent soul devil cultivator was still easily killed by him. Scholar, you thought for a while and said, "No, that's not right. Although that devil cultivator's devil aura is similar to the devil aura here, it's still different. It doesn't seem to be as solid and much weaker." Fellow Taoist Guifang, am I right? Guifang Devil Monarch nodded. "Yes, that devil cultivator's devil aura is similar to the devil aura here, but it's not as good. It might also be because his cultivation level wasn't high enough." Master Taoist Yuanmu shook his head. Unfortunately, that devil cultivator was already killed by fellow Taoist Qin, otherwise. Although he said that, he glanced at Qin Shi. Although the devil cultivator was dead, his things fell into Qin Shi's hands, but they didn't know whether there were any cultivation techniques or the like among them. Qin Shi naturally wouldn't hand over the things he already had. He just smiled and pretended he didn't see anything. Master Taoist Yuanmu was the head of a sect and a top late-stage nascent soul cultivator, so he was embarrassed to say it out loud. Seeing that Qin Shi didn't understand, he could only give up. In any case, devil techniques and the like were of no use to Juyan's sect. As they talked, the group of 12 people continued to move forward. Mo Chenga was halfway there when she suddenly felt a gust of devil aura soaring into the sky, surrounding her 3 young real fire sword formation. With a bang, real fire sprang out. She only had time to take a step back, but all the nascent soul cultivators were already on guard. Refined corpses. Upon seeing the source of the devil aura, Master Taoist Yuanmu's expression changed. Inside the small parlor in the garden, several charred corpses wrapped in devil aura staggered towards them. The devil aura around these refined corpses was so thick that they couldn't see their cultivation levels for a moment. "Junior, step back." "Scholar," you shouted. He waved the folding fan in his hand and was ready for battle. Mo Chenga stepped back without hesitation, standing at the very back with Ling Yunhe and the other 3 people. How could there be refined corpses? Master Taoist Yuanmu's gaze fell on her. Refined corpses were things of the devil path. Some devil cultivators destroyed cultivators' primordial spirits, then controlled them with special techniques to make them into puppets. This was refined corpses. Compared to spiritual beasts, refined corpses were much stronger. Because refined corpses were originally cultivators, they could use magic weapons and cultivate. The higher the cultivation level of the cultivator who made the refined corpse, the more powerful the refined corpse would be. If it was a perfect refined corpse with a master who was proficient in the Tao of control, its fighting strength could rival that of a cultivator in the same realm. For example, Demon Monarch Yu Ying's divine power wasn't too outstanding, but because he had 2 refined corpses in the early stage of the nascent soul realm, no late-stage nascent soul cultivator in Yunzhong dared to underestimate his strength. Mo Qingge frowned and answered, Senior Fu Yaozi said that there's devil aura in this space. If those cultivators died here, their corpses would be infected by the devil aura and turn into refined corpses. However, the appearance of this kind of natural refined corpse requires luck and coincidence, so the possibility is very low. Back then they did find refined corpses in the Immortal Palace, but they weren't here. Maybe those refined corpses wandered here. Natural refined corpses. Demon Monarch Guifang's expression changed slightly. This is indeed possible. Natural refined corpses are more difficult to deal with than man-made refined corpses. Cultivators would always lose some of their cultivation level when making refined corpses, but natural refined corpses wouldn't. Because their primordial spirits weren't artificially erased, they would even retain their previous fighting habits. As they spoke, the refined corpse was already in front of them, pouncing on Qin Shi, who was the closest to them. Qin Shi didn't dodge. This garden wasn't big, so there was nowhere to hide even if he wanted to. He raised his hand and a light shield suddenly appeared in front of him. At the same time, all the sword aura of the 3 young real fire sword hovering in the air merged into one. With a whoosh, the sword was covered with extreme young real fire and slashed at the refined corpse. Clang. Qin Shi frowned, waved his sword, and used extreme young real fire to force the refined corpse back 2 steps. Then he himself retreated. These refined corpses are at least in the nascent soul realm, and their bodies are very hard. Even my sword can't cut them. Although he wasn't a sword cultivator, the sharpness of the 3 young real fire sword wasn't inferior to that of a sword cultivator's sword. However, when he slashed at the refined corpse just now, it unexpectedly wasn't damaged in the slightest. It only retreated because it was afraid of extreme young real fire. Upon hearing this, the other nascent soul cultivators' expressions changed. Master Taoist Yuanmu's gaze swept across the area. He then looked at the unending stream of refined corpses appearing in the small garden. With a grave expression he said, Fellow Taoists, our path of retreat has been cut off. If we don't kill these refined corpses, I'm afraid we won't be able to leave. Chapter 465. All the nascent soul cultivators used all kinds of methods. Mo Qingge and the other 4 cultivators were only in the core formation realm, so they basically couldn't get involved. They could only hide at the back to avoid dragging others down. If Qin Shi wasn't here, Mo Qingge would find this scene very satisfying. A group of great cultivators was fighting in front of her, and she still had to take care of her own life. But now that Qin Shi was also among them, she felt it was dull and tasteless. Unfortunately, his strength was too low. If he wanted to help, it was best if he didn't get in the way. Of course, she wasn't idle either. It was rare to see several late-stage nascent great cultivators fighting together. Their divine abilities were astonishing, and if he could comprehend a little of it, it would be very helpful for him to form his nascent soul. She was not the only one with such thoughts. Ling Yunhe and the other 3 were also watching intently. Although most of these refined corpses were at the nascent soul stage, the 7 nascent soul cultivators were not weak, so there was no immediate danger. Nevertheless, Mo Qingge was rather worried when she saw the spiritual aura fluctuations caused by their attacks. Although divine sense was forbidden in this place, if the spiritual qi fluctuation was too obvious, it might attract the attention of others. If other nascent soul stage cultivators came over, it would be difficult to deal with them. After all, none of them wanted to share this immortal opportunity with anyone else. What she could think of, these nascent soul cultivators naturally couldn't think of. Scholar Yu repelled a refined corpse and said in a deep voice, Fellow Taoists, we can't afford to waste any more time here. Let's fight while we retreat. Reverend Yuanmu nodded. That's right. It would take too much time to kill them all. He turned to look at Mo Qingge and the others and said, Fellow Taoist Avidya, I'll have to trouble you with these juniors. Reverend Avidya smiled and nodded. Reverend Yuanmu then looked at Reverend Iron Mask, Ling Shiyu and Scholar Yu, Senior Brother Iron Mask, Junior Brother Ling, Mr. Yu, I'll have to trouble the 3 of you to bring up the rear. After the 3 of them agreed, he looked at the others and said, Fellow Taoist Guifang, Fellow Taoist Qin, the 3 of you will take the vanguard. Guifang Devil Monarch had no objections, and Qin Shi also nodded in agreement. Mo Qingge secretly admired his methodical way of handling things. This Reverend Yuan Mu was worthy of being the first seat Grand Supreme Elder of the number 1 sect in Yunzhong. He took the lead and put his senior and junior brothers in the back. The one protecting the 5 of them in the middle was the most trustworthy Reverend Wu Ming. Moreover, among the 7 of them, Master Taoist Yuan Mu, Guifang Devil Monarch, and Qin Shi were known for their offensive prowess. Revered Wu Ming's Buddhist Golden Light was known for its steadiness and gentleness. As for Master Taoist Iron Mask, Ling Xiu and Scholar Yu, their divine abilities were slightly lacking, but their defenses were pretty good. This arrangement was just right. Master Taoist Yuan Mu let out a soft shout and the exquisite pagoda in his hand moved, covering the corpse. The Guifang Devil Monarch's hands were empty, but they were filled with devil aura. With Mo Chinga's eyesight, she could only see that this mass of devil aura was actually a set of ghost claws. This set of ghost claws had shape but no body. She didn't know whether it was made of special materials or because it was Guifang Devil Monarch's unique secret technique. The 7 nascent soul cultivators fought and retreated. After an hour they finally left the courtyard. This battle didn't last too long, but it consumed a lot of their strength. As soon as these corpses smelled the breath of a living person, they would attack. Moreover, they weren't afraid of death, so they swarmed them and besieged them. It was really unbearable. Master Taoist Yuan Mu glanced at them and said, "Fellow Taoists, let's take a break. Be careful in the Immortal Palace. It's better to have sufficient spiritual aura." Everyone nodded in agreement and looked for a place to rest. Qin Shi heaved a sigh of relief. He put the 3 young real fire sword back and found a remote corner to rest with Mo Chinga. "Here you go." Just as he swallowed a few medicinal pills, Qin Shi saw Mo Chinga quietly handing him something. "This is." Looking at the unremarkable bead in his hand, he was puzzled. "Spirit guiding bead." Mo Chinga glanced around. Qin Shi understood and flicked his fingers, casting a soundproof barrier. "This is a treasure I found in the place where the Mo family's ancestor passed away. This bead can be used to store spiritual aura and can be drawn from it when needed." Upon hearing this, Qin Shi played with it for a while, then probed it with his divine sense. He was surprised. This bead can actually store so much spiritual aura. Magic weapons that could store spiritual aura had always been rare. In the cultivation world, there were only 2 common ways to restore spiritual aura during fights of magical power: medicinal pills and spirit stones. However, the spiritual aura that could be restored by medicinal pills and spirit stones was pitifully little for high-level cultivators' dantians. Therefore, some cultivators came up with this kind of magic weapon to store spiritual aura and draw spiritual aura from it during fights of magical power. However, the materials needed to make this kind of magic weapon were very precious, and it couldn't store too much spiritual aura. Qin Shi tested this bead and found that it could actually restore more than half of his spiritual aura. He was already a nascent soul cultivator, and his dantian could store a lot of spiritual aura. If he used up all his spiritual aura, he would need at least several days to fully recover just by meditating. If this kind of magic weapon was placed in a trade fair, it would probably be fought over, wouldn't it? Especially for nascent soul cultivators, it was very difficult for them to restore their spiritual aura. If they had this thing, they would have a much higher chance of winning in fights of magical power. However, this kind of thing couldn't be bought even if you had money. Mo Chinga smiled and calmly swept her gaze over the others. "You have to be careful of these people. With this thing you'll have one more life." Qin Shi nodded and put away the spirit-attracting bead. Their opponents were all nascent soul cultivators, and they still had to rely on him for this journey. The spirit-attracting bead was more useful to him, but it wouldn't be of much use to Mo Chinga. Before long, Master Taoist Yuan Mu stood up and asked, "Fellow Taoists, have you all rested enough?" With the help of endless high-level restorative panaceas, Qin Shi had long recovered his spiritual aura. He removed the soundproof barrier and stood up to meet up with Mo Chinga. Needless to say, the other nascent soul cultivators were all great cultivators from big cultivation groups, so how could they be poor? For this trip, they all prepared piles of spiritual pills and spirit stones, so they had long recovered their spiritual aura. Little friend Mo. Without needing Master Taoist Yuan Mu to say anything, Mo Chinga automatically walked in front with Qin Shi. After leaving the garden, they saw a rope bridge that was hundreds of feet long, connecting 2 peaks. This immortal palace occupied a very wide area, including all the peaks of Mount Lingshan. From the outside it looked like a palace, but they didn't know there was a universe inside. This rope bridge was also paved with high-level spirit stones. It was unknown what kind of spell was cast on it, but when more than 10 people stepped on it, it didn't move at all. Halfway there, Mo Chenga looked down and saw that the space between the two peaks was bottomless. There was only fog that blocked her line of sight. She frowned. She felt that this fog was mixed with some primordial devil aura and was very chaotic. Although it wasn't a big problem, her cultivation level was a bit low, so she felt uncomfortable. She pondered for a moment, then shook her sleeve and threw out the Tai Chi 8 diagrams. In midair, the Tai Chi 8 diagrams slowly unfolded. Water-like waves rippled around it, and wherever the waves passed, the aura gradually stabilized. Seeing this, Master Taoist Yuanmu praised, "Little friend Mo, this magic weapon is really rare. Its control of spiritual aura has reached an extremely exquisite level. Presumably, the person who made this magic weapon must be an expert." After calming the surrounding spiritual aura, Mo Chenga put the Tai Chi 8 diagrams back into her sleeve. As she walked, she answered, "This treasure was bestowed by my ancestor." "Senior, you flatter me." "Really? It seems that little friend Mo's sect is extraordinary." He cast a meaningful glance at Qin Shi. Unfortunately, Qin Shi only smiled and didn't answer. Yunzhong cultivators were good at controlling spiritual aura, which was something celestial pole cultivators couldn't do. No cultivator in the celestial pole could make this Tai Chi 8 diagrams, but Mo Yaoqing was born in Yunzhong and had a profound control of spiritual aura, so she could make this kind of magic weapon. However, neither of them would explain. It was best if they misunderstood. That way they would be afraid of them and wouldn't act rashly. After smoothly crossing the rope bridge, the group of people stopped. "Seniors, this is the road leading to the scripture depository," Mo Chenga said. Looking at the narrow mountain road in front of them, Ling Xiu asked, "Little friend Mo, why did you stop?" Mo Chenga didn't answer, but Scholar Yu sighed. "It's another restriction." Ling Xiu was startled. He looked carefully and vaguely found a slight fluctuation of spiritual aura in front of them. With his cultivation level in the middle stage of the nascent soul realm, he actually didn't notice this restriction. It was really too brilliant. Guifang Devil Monarch looked at it, then asked Mo Chenga, "Didn't the 5 saints come here before? Why is this restriction still intact?" Mo Chenga shook her head gently. "Senior Guifang, have you heard that brilliant restrictions can repair themselves?" Guifang Devil Monarch was stunned and frowned. Master Taoist Yuanmu and the others were also shocked. "So this is a restriction that can repair itself?" Mo Chenga nodded and said, "Seniors, it was the 5 seniors who worked together to break this restriction that year. Although Junior has Senior Fuyaozi's help now, I can't rely on my own strength to break this restriction." What she said was reasonable, so no one doubted her. The brilliance of this restriction was something nascent soul cultivators like them had never seen in their lives. If a core formation junior could smoothly break it with the guidance of Fuyao's divine sense, it would be too easy. After all, in the face of absolute strength, no matter how brilliant a technique was, it was useless. Scholar Yu took the lead and said, "That being the case, little friend Mo, please wait on the side." As he said that, he looked at Master Taoist Yuanmu and asked, "Fellow Taoist Yuanmu, what do you think?" Master Taoist Yuanmu frowned. After thinking for a while, he turned to Lingyan and said, "Soul-restricting bead." Lingyan understood. He took a few steps forward and offered the soul-restricting bead. Mo Chenga remembered that when she and Lingyan entered Carefree Valley, he once said that the soul-restricting bead had a restraining effect on spiritual aura and divine senses, so it could pass through restrictions unimpeded. The one he had back then was only an imitation of the soul-restricting bead. Presumably, the real thing should be even more powerful, right? Master Taoist Yuanmu stood in front of the restriction, holding the bead in one hand and making a hand seal with the other. A set of complicated hand seals was performed, and a white light flashed between his fingers. When he finished making the hand seals, he shouted softly and the white light hit the soul-restricting bead. With a soft buzz, the soul-restricting bead lit up and shone on the restriction on the mountain path. Under the soul-restricting bead's light, the powerful but imperceptible restriction had nowhere to hide. Everyone was delighted to see this, but in the next moment the soul-restricting bead's light flashed and eventually dimmed. This bead is indeed a rare treasure. Presumably it's old man Guazian's work, right? Inside Mo Chenga's mind, Fuyao's faint voice rang out. Unfortunately, if this restriction was so easy to break, how could he take on the responsibility of guarding the scripture depository in this great ancient cultivation group? Chapter 466. After losing its effect, Master Taoist Yuanmu looked gloomy for a long time. Different from Wu Ming, God-forbidding bead was a real spiritual treasure inherited from Saint Guizhen and enshrined in Juyin sect for tens of thousands of years. Although there were countless outstanding cultivators in Juyin sect in the past 100,000 years, none of their inherited spiritual treasures were more powerful than God-forbidding bead. In the end, Master Taoist Yuanmu sighed helplessly, handed the bead back to Ling Yunhe and said, "Fellow Taoists, this restriction is extraordinary. I can't think of a solution right now." Guifeng Demon Monarch glanced at him and said faintly, "I know very little about formations, so I'm afraid I can't help in finding a way to break it. However, if there's anything I need help with, I'll do my best." Revered Wu Ming smiled and looked at Scholar Yu. "If that's the case, I can only trouble Mr. Yu." Scholar Yu nodded with a solemn expression. "I'll try my best." None of them was a professional array master. However, nascent soul stage cultivators, especially those who had spent hundreds or even thousands of years in the late stage of the nascent soul stage, were mostly proficient in miscellaneous skills. They were even more skilled than common array masters. Therefore, they didn't need to bring another array master with them. This was especially the case for Scholar Yu. He was an erudite great scholar with profound knowledge. His understanding of the Tao of formations was even deeper, so this matter was naturally left to him. Mo Chenga felt she didn't need to show off in front of these late-stage nascent soul cultivators, so she didn't say anything and just watched. Scholar Yu took out his compass, formation flags and other things and began to check around to determine yin, yang, and the 5 elements. Any formation, even the primordial grand formation, would be based on this, and there would be no exceptions. Therefore, the first thing a formation master would do when faced with an unfamiliar great formation was to determine yin, yang, and the 5 elements. This process would take a long time, so Mo Chenga simply took out her compass and formation-breaking items to observe yin, yang, and the 5 elements. Seeing this, Ju Wu asked curiously, "Benefactor Mo, do you also know formations?" Mo Chenga looked up and answered humbly, "I know a thing or two, so I don't dare to make a fool of myself." Upon hearing their conversation, Master Taoist Iron Mask, who had been silent the whole time, inadvertently glanced at them. He looked at them seriously for a while before he said, "Little friend Mo, you're too modest. Looking at the treasures in your hands, your attainments and formations must be quite high, right?" Mo Chenga cast a surprised look at Master Taoist Iron Mask, but she only smiled and said, "No matter how high juniors' attainments and formations are, it's still nothing in front of seniors. I just want to take this opportunity to learn from Senior Yu." Enlightened Master Iron Mask nodded slightly. He did not say anything else and looked away. With Mo Chenga's age, no matter how talented she was in formations, it would still be very difficult for her to be on par with nascent soul cultivators like them. However, he was quite surprised. He didn't expect that this junior was so young and was only a step away from the nascent soul realm. Yet, he was also proficient in formations. He was really a promising talent. Unfortunately, she was obviously from a large sect or clan, so it was impossible for her to be recruited by the Jian sect. Mo Chenga was holding her special compass, recording the yin, yang and 5 elements she observed one by one into a jade slip. Qin Shi, on the other hand, watched with interest from the side. He himself was quite proficient in miscellaneous studies. He was talented in pill concocting and tool refining, and he started studying talisman crafting when he was in the core formation realm. Now, he also had a certain level of proficiency in talisman crafting. However, he only knew a little about formations because he didn't have much interest in it and he didn't have much time to study it. Coincidentally, the things he wasn't good at were exactly the things Mo Chenga was good at. He really didn't know whether he should say they were a match made in heaven or not. Seeing that Mo Chenga's brows were knitting tighter and tighter, he couldn't help but ask, "What's wrong? Is it really that difficult?" Mo Chenga was mumbling something when she heard his question. She paused for a moment, then raised her eyebrows. "Look at Senior Yu, he's already like that, let alone me?" Qin Shi looked up. Sure enough, Scholar Yu was also frowning and mumbling something silently. Both of their expressions were exactly the same. He couldn't help but shake his head and smile. He then adjusted his breath and waited on the side. After a while, Mo Chenga asked him again, "Right, where's your mountain-fixing lantern?" The mountain-fixing lantern was one of Qin Shi's magic weapons. He obtained it from a secret place a long time ago and it had a wonderful restrictive effect. However, since even the soul-restraining bead didn't work, presumably the mountain-fixing lantern also wouldn't have any effect, right? Although that was what he thought, Qin Shi still took out the magic weapon. "What? Is it useful?" Mo Chenga didn't answer. She took the mountain-fixing lantern and looked at it for a while, then said, "It seems This mountain-fixing lantern and this restriction used the same formation. The two of them didn't use a soundproof barrier, nor did they deliberately avoid other people. Upon hearing this voice, Scholar Yu suddenly turned around and stared at them. Immerse didn't have time to pay attention to him. She once again probed with her divine comprehension, closed her eyes, and carefully explored the mysteries inside. After a while, she heaved a sigh of relief, then raised her head to look at Scholar Yu. She waved the mountain-fixing lantern in her hand and said, "Senior Yu, this thing might be helpful in breaking restrictions." Scholar Yu had long been waiting for her to say this, so he didn't stand on ceremony. He took the lantern and hurriedly nodded at the two of them to express his gratitude. His lifespan had already reached 1,000 years, and Scholar Yu had been immersed in the Tao of formations for at least several hundred years, so his attainments in formations weren't inferior to Immerse's. Now that he had the mountain-fixing lantern, he hurriedly probed it with his divine sense. In just a while, his tightly furrowed brows relaxed. The others were all paying attention to him. Upon seeing this scene, Master Taoist Yuanmu asked with concern, "Mr. Yu, can this thing really help in breaking restrictions?" Scholar Yu didn't answer. He seemed to be immersed in it. Sometimes he looked like he was suddenly enlightened and sometimes he looked confused. But this didn't last too long. After a while he once again started to record something on the jade slip, but this time his speed was much faster. One moment he was observing the feng shui compass, the next moment he was examining the mountain-fixing lantern, and the next moment he was recording something. Several hours later, Scholar Yu finally put away the feng shui compass. His brows relaxed and he said, "It's finally done." The others were all delighted and looked at him. Scholar Yu was in high spirits as he returned the mountain-fixing lantern to Qin Shi. At the same time he also smiled at Immerse. "I have to thank little friend Mo. If you hadn't discovered this, I'm afraid we would have had to waste a lot of time to find the way." Immerse smiled. "Senior Yu is too polite." Since they found the principle of restrictions, breaking restrictions wasn't difficult anymore. With several nascent soul seniors here, Immerse didn't need to worry at all. She only needed to watch from the side. It was really a lucky hit. Fu Yaozi snorted. Upon hearing his unhappy tone, Immerse found it funny. "Master, in fact you deliberately didn't give them a hint and let them play around here, right?" Fu Yaozi said confidently. "So what? I don't like this group of people." Immerse couldn't help but laugh. She then said, "I originally thought Master was too rational, but now I realize Master is also a human." Fu Yaozi didn't say anything for a long time. It was unclear whether he was angry or didn't know what to say. Immerse didn't take it seriously and asked, "Master, isn't the passage to the Immortal Palace only open for 3 days? Why do you still want to waste their time? If we stay here for too long, won't it be disadvantageous for us?" "There's nothing to worry about," Fu Yaozi said. "Even if this restriction has the ability to repair itself, it's been going on for more than 100,000 years, so its power has decreased a lot. It's no longer at its peak. Besides, no matter what, they're great cultivators at the top of the world. Even if they're a bit worse than the 5 of us, they won't be much worse. If we could do it in the past, they should be able to do it too." He paused for a moment, then said, "It's good that we don't have much time. When the time comes, we'll go our separate ways. They're anxious to search for treasures according to the information Grandmaster left behind, so they won't have time to care about what we're doing." "Oh, I see." Immerse understood now. The others naturally had their own secrets. If they could safely go their separate ways to search for treasures, they wouldn't have time to cause trouble for them. In terms of searching for treasures, she had Fu Yaozi, so she had an advantage. If nothing unexpected happened, she would be one step faster than them. As they spoke, they'd already broken the restriction. This time, no one asked Immerse to walk in front, so she just followed behind them with Qin Shi. The mountain road was narrow on both sides, only allowing 2 people to pass side by side. Yu Shuxing carefully observed, then said, "There aren't any other restrictions." Only then did the others set foot on the mountain road. They moved forward slowly and cautiously. When they reached the end, they saw a formation. This formation was different from the previous one. It was merely a transporting formation. With Yu Shuxing's attainments in formations, he quickly figured out the missing parts and put spirit stones in the corresponding positions to repair it. When the transporting formation lit up, they looked at each other, but no one said anything. Who would go in first in the end? This problem was really hard to solve. First, they didn't know if there would be any danger if they just went in like this. Second, this was the Scripture Pavilion, a place that specialized in collecting cultivation techniques. Who knew if the people who went in would get something first? Amit Ba. The first to speak was revered Wu Ming. He smiled and said, "Since fellow Taoists can't decide for a while, let this old monk go in first." Master Taoist Yuanmu only hesitated for a moment before retreating. "I have no objections." After pondering for a moment, Yu Shuxing also nodded. Since the two of them retreated, Guifang Devil Monarch could only step aside. "Fellow Taoist Wu Ming, please." He looked reluctant. The Devil Path and Buddhism had old grievances in the sea of returning ruins, not to mention the two of them even fought. Qin Shi and Mo Chenga didn't step forward, tacitly giving up. Revered Wu Ming put his palms together and stepped into the transporting formation with awareness. He put down the spirit stones to activate the transporting formation and disappeared in front of everyone. After revered Wu Ming entered, Master Taoist Yuanmu no longer had any scruples and snatched the second place. His Jiyin sect was the strongest, so the others couldn't compete with him and could only give way. Then it was Yu Shuxing who led Han Shizhi. Guifang Devil Monarch seemed unwilling to clash with the others and was willing to give way. In the end there were only 4 people left outside. Guifang Devil Monarch asked, "Fellow Taoist Qin, you don't mind if we, master and disciple, go first, right?" Qin Shi smiled and shook his head. In terms of cultivation level, he ranked last among these nascent soul cultivators, so he should be a bit more humble. When everyone else's figures disappeared, Fu Yaozi's voice rang out again. "You don't have identity tablets. After you go in, there'll be a small killing formation. Don't use magic weapons, use talismans." You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.